But basically transform the values into structured fields.
Sure.
Because right now
Obviously.
they are just random strings.
This is the part that I'm stuck on. That's that's the main thing that I'm stuck on. I think the no index, no snippet could probably be yes. Arrangement.
So that we cannot change. Like knowing that
You can't change that.
for historical reasons.
Even though it's a new.
I mean, we are okay. Like we would need to recondition people.
Okay,
I mean,
so
that's
it's just on 9:15, but I think we're going to wait about 5 minutes to see if we get a few more people come in, because some people might have trouble finding the location or with the lovely transport issues today. So just be patient.
Yeah, my train, I was in this Central, and my train is 15 minutes delayed, and they canceled the one right after me. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, mine was like, what, 40 minutes late.
40?
It stopped in every station for like 10-15 minutes. I was supposed to be at like 7:50 something, got
Wow.
to like 8:40, 8:30 something.
And where's your origin?
Same place, Brussels Central. And so it's very weird. Like, and there are people getting off at the places the train stops, so I'm just not sure what exactly happened. So they're supposed to have only one stop to get here, but it stopped everywhere and it got stuck in multiple places.
It was fun following the collection of people with suitcases because they kept shifting where they were standing, and even the platform they're on, they were all like.
Yeah, I could only get on the second train.
It's so
The first
weird.
one was like,
I got on at Central, got on the train, came here 2 stops later, like no problems. I was on the one train that worked.
So you're the one that worked.
I think you're the one who caused the problem. That's it, it's all my fault. I totally agree.
Tomorrow should be better, but for getting back tonight, for what it's worth, there is an express bus that goes down kind of to the, I guess, to the east of the Central Core, the number 12, and it got me here in a half an hour straight.
Oh, yeah.
So that's very pleasant, actually.
Number 26 was one that I took. It was not quite as good, but still fine.
So I'm a chicken. I have buses disabled in my list of acceptable public transportation options. 'Cause I always have this fear.
You live in North America, don't you?
I always have this fear I'm going to get on a bus and it's going to go off somewhere, an hour away from town that I can't stop and get off.
So the
Trains, they're fixed, right? You can always get on a train on the other way.
You would have different controls, but you can also specify global controls.
Right. So the question I kind of have is, given that you're able to, you'll receive a user agent field request, you not condition the response on the request and drop the user agent on it. So that then the user agent knows that this is for me. It's always going to be for me. It's a little more complex.
For the folks who are remote, can you hear us talking reasonably well?
So historically,
Yes, we can.
Lovely, we can hear you very well. Very nice, thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. Fantastic.
Oh, you want to make it transparent.
Because
Hello.
Transparency. Plus, they will.
Hi, Brian.
Well, they should have the same rules for everyone. One of the nice things about it's really patrons there. And that's the good.
I think we'll start at 9:20.
Is that,
Mike is John.
it's,
80s there.
Oh,
Good morning. Can you hear me?
it's purposely taken up.
Stefano, good morning.
Good morning.
good morning, Stefan.
Right. It's just to me. This will fly from the rest of text data.
But I mean, you could have like robots type nothing here and an example bot somewhere.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
And
Nothing.
well, you can bring that up because of the different value propositions for different what's happening.
Well, it seemed fixing.
Exactly.
But if
I'm just going to see your face.
the expression usage purposes covers the main things.
Oh, then you don't need that. But here you could have like example bot index and the opposite. And then you have like a global rule, like no one indexes this shit. Apart from one kind of.
Yeah. Do you really ever make that?
Oh, yeah.
Do you find that you have an arrangement with someone and you would then just know that you have an arrangement with them and ignore the advice? So what's better?
I mean, we have the contracts, but.
No, it's true. Well, let's just wait for just a minute or two.
So the nice thing about robots.txt is that you can send it back with any unit
Oh, this guy's sending it right.
with audio unit type. And that basically has like the first, I don't know,
It
like
just reads it out.
500 octets are actually the robots.txt file in text form. And then he reads out he reads it out for humans.
No.
He's my manager.
No. It's great. PCM?
What was that?
So why
Oh,
can't you have that?
I actually can show it. Like what he does is user agent star disallow everything.
Yeah.
And then user agent Bing bot allow everything. User agent Google bot allow everything.
But that's because all of the bots have you don't have all the bots potentially do. If you were able to say that it was just socioacting,
Yeah, we should start.
Yeah.
then you have a way to say
Okay,
all user agents socioacting. Yeah.
let's go ahead and get started. So this is the first interim meeting of AIPREF working group. Welcome. Today, we're going to have a brief introduction. We're going to talk a little bit about the IETF process, just to allow the folks who might be new to it kind of get a little more familiar with how we do work in the IETF. We're going to do a round of introductions, and then we're going to get into the actual work. We were expecting a few more people in the room, so a few people might filter in, but I think we should probably go ahead and get started. Let's go. First of all, the IETF regulars will know what I'm about to ask next. Can someone volunteer to take notes? And I'm not going to lean on the nitpicker. Ted, you are a true gentleman. Thank you so much. I'd say if you can maybe start a notes document and share the link in the chat, if that makes sense.
There is a notes
Don't you
document.
just use that hedge doc from the?
They arranged one for us? Okay, great. So, yeah, we prepared a short introduction of the IETF process. This is a slide that you'll become familiar with. It's called the Note Well slide. There are a number of terms that IETF participants operate under regarding things like the Code of Conduct, anti-harassment procedures, intellectual property rights, including both copyright and patents, the privacy policy, and the general standards process. So if you're not familiar with this, you can go to your favorite internet search engine and search for IETF Note Well. This is both the legal process and behavioral kind of requirements of doing work at the IETF. And this is the kind of the formal approved presentation of this. It's been through a lot of revision over the years. The rest of this presentation is an informal introduction to the practicalities of participating and doing work in the IETF. Some of the IETF regulars may disagree with what we say. That's okay. Next slide, please. So, first of all, participating in the IETF, one thing that may be not obvious to newcomers is that the IETF has no concept of membership. You don't sign an agreement. You don't have a corporate membership of any sort. Anyone who shows up, anyone who subscribes to the mailing list can be an IETF participant. It is a very open participation. And so we get a very broad spectrum of people participating and sometimes quite lively discourse. And that has some implications on how we make decisions, which we'll get to in just a little while. Another norm in the community is that participation here is considered to be individual. Welcome, we're just getting started. We haven't missed anything. it's not representative, and that means that both you're not considered to represent your company's views or your employer's views, and also you don't represent the views of people outside the room. So, coming here and saying, well, I've talked to 500 people and they all agree that my proposal is great, carries little weight in the room. It's more about the arguments you make. Now, of course, to some degree, this is a fiction. Everyone knows that Martin works for Mozilla and that his opinion carries great weight there. But we behave as if we're all just individual engineers or people who have other kinds of input having a discussion in a room. And that norm helps smooth the discussion in many ways. Of course, professional behavior is expected. We have a couple of documents giving guidelines and procedures for handling things like anti-harassment and guidelines for conduct. And there are resources available if there are problems in that. If you have an issue, please come talk to us as the chairs. There are also people like the Ombuds team who can handle more severe issues and indeed process constraints that can be put in place if we have serious problems. The discussion in IETF working groups is often quite robust, if I can put it delicately. We sometimes have a great disagreement about things, but we try and make the disagreements about the ideas and not about the people behind them. Please try and keep that in mind. And finally, when you're participating, we're discussing something, we often have a phenomenon, especially with a lot of engineers in the room, where people hyper-focus on one particular issue and we discuss it to death. And that is often called rat holing on the issue. And so don't be surprised if we as chairs try and pull back from that and refocus discussion and move on. That's not about not letting you have a say, it's about making sure that we're using our time well. Any other comments on that? Okay. Next slide. Lag, okay. So when you make contributions to our discussions or you propose text to put into the drafts, be aware that the intellectual property terms are put into play both around patents and the copyright you have in your contribution. So you need to understand that if you're concerned about that. Very briefly regarding patents, if you're personally aware of intellectual property that applies to your contribution, you have an obligation to disclose that. Otherwise, it's a submarine patent, and that's not good. Likewise, everything that happens here is in the open. If you participated in the workshop that we had last year for the IAB, that was under Chatham House rule. This working group is not under Chatham House rule. Everything here is considered to be in the open. And your contributions may be made public. Sessions may be recorded. They may be minuted. As we said, we have notes for the session. And so you need to understand the privacy statement.
Would there be a recording on YouTube of this as well?
We're not recording this session, but we can.
I think Medeco does.
I think like Medeco does it, like by default.
That record button, does that signify that we are recording or that we can record? Okay, lovely. So never mind. We are. The most important thing, of course, that we do is we make decisions. We come to consensus about what we're going to write down in the documents. And so the IETF practices what we term rough consensus, which means that it's not unanimity. That's not any definition of consensus. Someone can be in the rough. We can say, okay, we've discussed, we understand your concern or your perspective, but that is not carried away in the group. And so we declare that person to be in the rough, and consensus has gone a different way. And that's how we are able to make progress, even though some people may disagree. Because again, it is open participation, we get a wide variety of viewpoints, and so it's sometimes difficult to accommodate them all. But we do listen to those viewpoints and we consider them. A very interesting RFC, it doesn't have any official standing in the standards process, but it may be very enlightening to read, is RFC 7282 on consensus and hunting in the IETF, which gives a perspective on how we make decisions in the IETF. It might be quite illuminating if you're not familiar with the IETF.
It'll get you into the right ballpark.
Exactly, it gives you the right, and some people disagree with some of the points it makes, but it does give you a very interesting perspective on IETF consensus. For the important decisions in the group, we will issue a call for consensus, and we'll say, okay, we want to do this thing as a group. And when we do that, it's important that you express your support if you support the consensus. It is very difficult for us as chairs to interpret silence. And so if you support something, please do say so. We'll do this on the mailing list. Consensus calls will always be on the mailing list. And I'll discuss this in a minute, we may in this room, in a meeting, get a sense of that room, but ultimately we need to confirm the consensus on the mailing list. If you don't agree, please explain why. And ideally give an argument, a technical argument or a policy argument as to why you don't think that this is the right conclusion. It is very difficult to say, for us to interpret, just I don't want to do it or I don't agree. That doesn't really carry a lot of weight because this isn't voting. This is not a voting process. It's a consensus process. And as I said, all consensus is established on the mailing list.
That makes sense. I think like one thing to add, like to Mark's point about like being quiet, right? Like a lot of times people consider it as like positive thing, but especially when the documents get processed like and move forward without like positive feedback on the document itself, like the chairs won't move the document forward. So I think it's gonna like pull us up, especially since we're on tight timeline, as like Mark will talk about.
Hopefully we won't see this happen, but if you disagree with the decision and the group establishes consensus and you believe there's been a process error or a grave error in the decision, there is an appeal process. Please talk to the chairs first and we can try and work through it within the group. If that doesn't work, you can still appeal to the area director. Actually, area director, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Mike Bishop. I'm the responsible area director for this working group and a couple others within Web and Internet Transport. So if there's an issue with the chairs, I'm your next point of appeal.
That doesn't sound ominous at all. Thank you, Mike. Again, just being in the rough, you're very unlikely to convince Mike. I would hope that something needs to be reconsidered. You need to show substantial issue. Further appeals are possible beyond the area director. You can read the Internet Standards Process documents to understand that. Those are thankfully quite rare. Next slide. So meetings. We are, as I said, in our first interim meeting. We also have meetings at the larger IETF meetings, but because they're in shorter time frames, these interim meetings are usually more productive. We usually, I think, are going to have them, when we have interim meetings, have them as face-to-face meetings because they are higher bandwidth meetings. They're opportunities to have more nuanced discussions. And it's important to understand these really are opportunities to have discussions and work on the issues and actually do work. They're working meetings. Presentations are not going to be prioritized. This is not just an information passing exercise. We do allow remote participation to make sure that we have open access for those who can't make it physically to the meetings. And so it's very important in these meetings that you speak clearly and loudly so that they can hear us. Remote folks, if you can't hear us, please interrupt, maybe at first in chat and otherwise actually audibly to say that there's a technical issue and we need to improve it. It sounds like you can hear us pretty well right now, which is good. And also in the room, please try not to have side conversations. Please speak one at a time so that it's very confusing for remote people if there's lots of back chatter happening or if people are talking over each other. So let's try and maintain that. Yes.
One thing it might be good to remind people is to also state your name when you are, such as I'm Glenn D.
Right. So it is an IETF convention to say your name before you speak at the mic cue. In interim meetings, we don't enforce that as rigorously, but I think maybe when the first few times you speak, perhaps it might be helpful for, especially for the remote people and the people in the room, just to remind each other. We will do interruptions after this, and hopefully that'll help as well. We will be experimenting with how we keep a queue of speakers. If there are a relatively small number of speakers and it's relatively natural, we'll allow discussion just to flow. But when lots of people have opinions, we'll start keeping a queue. And I think from what we've been talking about, in the room we'll keep a queue and we'll also let the Meet Echo folks remotely keep a queue and we'll just balance it between them.
Yeah, I can manage the.
If you can manage that, that'd be much appreciated. We might experiment with how we do that, but we'll see. And again, as I said before, all decisions will be confirmed on the mailing list. We only get a sense of the room here in the synchronous meeting. We want to make sure that if people didn't have a chance to be in the meeting, either remotely or in person, that can still weigh into the decision, so we get a broader consensus. Next slide. The drafts, the documents, that's the focus of the work. That's why we're here, is to write things down and publish them as RFCs. As individuals, you can publish drafts at any time to make a concrete proposal. Sometimes that's a great way to crisp up an idea and give it some nuance and get it in front of the group. The nice thing is when you do that, you're submitting that under the IETF IPR terms, so everybody understands that it's not proprietary, it's a true contribution. And so when you do that, you make that proposal with a name and convention of draft, and then your name or a signifier for your name, and then AIPREF to call it to the attention of the working group. That's just a convention for naming. You don't have to use internet drafts to make proposals, of course. Don't feel obligated. It's just a way to structure your submission. The working group will, and we're going to talk a lot about that this week, the working group will adopt drafts as its official work items. And when we do that, we will issue a call for adoption to gain consensus to adopt that document. So you'll see that on the mailing list.
So
Again,
it's not consensus about the contents of the document.
I'm getting there. Be patient. Those adopted drafts are just starting points for the work. And that's really, especially this week, this is the mindset that we need to be in. We're not gaining consensus on every word in the document or the major concepts even. We're just saying this is the best place to start to launch our work from. And then we will raise issues and say, well, I don't like that part of the document, or this needs to be from that, or whatever. And we'll work through those issues. There's no presumption of consensus on the content of the documents. So please keep that in mind when we're adopting those starting points. In many ways, that biases towards adopting the cleanest, well-written, smallest documents so we can expand them. If there's a lot of fluff around there, then we have to work to kind of cut it down to the core before we can really get work done. The editors of the documents are chosen by the chairs and serve at the chair's pleasure. Generally, no, that's not threatening at all. Generally, it's a convention that the person who proposed the document is at least one of the editors, but that is sometimes not always the case. Especially if that person is relatively new to editing IETF documents, we're likely to assign a more seasoned IETF editor to help them out who understands the conventions. And it's really important to remember that the editors are the servants of the working group. They have a lot of autonomy in that they can go and edit the document and rearrange it and so forth, but it is not their opinion that drives what's in the document, it's the consensus of the working group.
And I think another key point is the change control of the document moves from you to the working group itself, right?
Thank you. That is a very good point. Yeah, and whenever you make a proposal, understand that change control is with the working group. It is not your document anymore. And the adopted drafts have the convention. Their name is draft-IETF-AIPREF, and then something. So that signifies that it is a working group adopted document. And you can always go into the data tracker to our working group homepage and find the list of documents that have been adopted and what their status is and so on. So, yes?
So, and this is covered later, let me know. Oh, well, essentially, this should go in there. So the documents are stored in GitHub. So do we use a standard GitHub document and issue tracking flow? I guess that's the next slide.
We'll get there
Great.
very
Go for
soon,
it.
yes. So, and actually that's worth a word. We didn't put it there explicitly, but Data Tracker is the official document store for the IETF. It holds the status and where it is in the process and the official issued drafts. And so the drafts are numbered 000102. But as you see, we also are talking about using GitHub. GitHub is really the tool that the editors and chairs use to manage the minutia of producing those drafts. And so, the consensus, I know that this practice changes from group to group and from venue to venue. But I think the way we're going in this group is the consensus is, consensus is always determined on the list. It can't be determined on GitHub. Hello, Maria. We're talking about IETF process. I don't think you've missed anything. You may disagree with what we talked about, but you haven't missed anything. We're not going to establish consensus in the issues list or in pull requests. And indeed, pull requests, realize that if you have discussion on pull requests, a lot of people may not even see it. So don't assume that everyone has seen it on the issues list or especially on pull requests. It's okay to talk about the editorial and minor matters on the issues, but really we're going to encourage substantial discussions to move to the mailing list, because that's the most, especially for IETF newcomers or non-technical people, that's the most democratic place, an accessible place for them to access that information. And so the mindset that we'd like people to be in is that the issues are really for tracking things that we want to address in the working group. It's not the place to make a proposal. If you create an issue and say, I want the document to say this, then we'll probably close that issue. And we really want it to be, these are the topics of discussion, the matters for consideration, rather than just a way to throw proposals up. Because in my experience, if we have open season on the issues list, everybody puts their hobby horse or their concerns in the issues, and we have this exploded list of issues that we have to work through, and it creates a lot of busy work for the group. There's a lot of duplication or things that the entire group really doesn't want to consider. So we're going to ask people to really discuss things in the mailing list first, and we'll try and distill what the issues that are important to talk about, and the editors or chairs will put those in the issues list. We're not going to prohibit working group members from opening issues, but we really want you to think about it and ideally talk about it on the list first before we open an issue.
So you don't worry about mapping PRs to issues?
Oh, we'll do that, sure. Yeah, you know, if you want to make a PR to address a particular issue, please do so. That's great. The editors will be making PRs as well, and we'll link those to the issues. If you just create a PR and don't create an issue of the underlying thing that wants to be addressed, it's probably going to be boring.
Unless it's just fixing a typo.
Purely editorial. Those will be gratefully accepted by the editors, I'm sure. If it's editorial, then it's open season. Yeah, please do. And I'm sure the editors will both appreciate and be annoyed by that. Next slide. Oh, and oh, by the way, sorry, the link at the top, we have the beginnings of a working group homepage that we put together on GitHub as well. And so that contains links to all the important things for the working group. So that's a handy starting point for everyone that might be useful for you. Just IETF-workinggroup-AIPREF.github.io. It's an awkward naming convention, but it's suggested by an RFC, so I bump the trend.
Mark, can take like a minute to kind of show the page?
Sure, yeah, show data tracker. That'd be great, actually.
So I'll just like switch to the data tracker page for a second.
That's all right. Don't worry about it. Touch those curtains and bad things happen.
Is your machine?
Okay, so I did post like the, so if you go to datatracker.itf.org/wg/AIPREF, you should be able to see the page, the working group page, and all these links that Mark talked about are linked in there.
Correct.
Both the GitHub org and the web page are linked up there.
And especially across the top there, the tabs, documents, the documents tab lists all the documents. The meetings tab lists our meetings and the details of them and so forth and so on. So that's, between the data tracker page really is the authoritative page. The GitHub page that I put up is just a helpful resource for the GitHub specific stuff. And it links out all the data tracker stuff too. Slide number where we are. There. So once we get to a place where the editors and the chairs believe that all the issues that have been raised have been discussed and the documents are in a good place, we'll issue what's called working group last call. And this is basically the opportunity for the entire working group to look at where we're at and affirm that yes, we think this is ready to go. This is reflecting the established consensus. And this itself is a consensus process. This is really your last chance to say, oh, we haven't talked about this yet, or whatever, and to get that issue in. Now, if it's something we've discussed before and has already established consensus on, we really need to see new information to reopen that issue. We don't want to rehash the same issues again and again when we're in that working group last call. But if there is new information, please bring it to people's attention, or if there's something we've genuinely missed, please bring it to our attention, and we'll have a discussion. And it may be we'll say, okay, we really need to address that, or maybe we'll say, let's push that off until the next revision of the document, or it's not in scope for this work, or what have you, but we'll have a discussion of that. Working group last call, generally, it's for, depending on the complexity of the document, it's either 2 or 4 weeks is usually the norm. We'll see how we're going at the time. Again, when we have that working group last call, it's a consensus call. Expressing support is important. It is very hard for us as chairs to interpret silence. And so if you support the document going forward, please say so. If you do have issues, again, that's your last opportunity in the working group. Next slide. After working group last call succeeds, we will send the document off to our area director, Mike, who you just met. He'll have a look at it, do an initial evaluation. If he sees issues with his practiced eye, he may send it back to us, either just the editors or the entire working group for work. Undoubtedly, some editorial or stylistic issues are discovered at this time. They're usually just handled by the editors. But if there are substantial issues, that might come back to the working group. Once the area director is happy with it, they'll initiate the IETF last call, which is much like the working group last call, but it's for the entire IETF takes a look at the document. And it also kicks off what are called directorate reviews, where there are volunteers who look at the document from a particular perspective. Probably the most well-known is the security directorate. They'll look at it from a security perspective, and they will raise any issues that they see that haven't been considered by the group. We will, again, if they're able to be handled by the editors and the chairs, we'll handle those issues. If they're more substantial, it may come back to the working group for additional discussion. We may have to make document changes as a result, or we may say, no, the working group's already considered this, and we think the consensus lies this way, and we're not going to make a change. Because ultimately, those directorate reviews don't carry official weight. They're just a new perspective from a new participant, and we treat it like any other participant's contribution. Then the IESG evaluates that feedback during the IETF last call. They do their own reviews. We may go through another set of changes depending on what the nature of those reviews are. And eventually they'll have a vote on the document and either pass it through or send it back to the working group for the work. It is a somewhat onerous process. A lot of the weight falls on the editors and then some on the chairs. Sometimes it comes back to the working group, but it does take some time. And then finally it goes to the RFC editor queue, and the changes after that point are only editorial to align with the stylistic conventions of the RFC series. Next slide. And then once we ship our deliverables, we can consider new work. We can consider rechartering the group to take on a greater scope or ancillary work. That requires IETF-wide review. It doesn't necessarily mean that's an onerous process. Rechartering can be fairly simple, effective, especially if it's a very logical next step. Our charter is very aggressive in its timescale, and so that implies that we're probably going to ship something fairly limited to start, and then recharter to expand that scope and have some follow-up work. But we'll see how things go.
Does that imply we're only shipping one thing initially?
There's 3 things.
We have 3 deliverables.
That's what I.
Yeah. So that's our current scope, and we can maybe do a quick charter review as well.
So deliverables on a charter can be accomplished in any number of ways. You could take one thing and turn it into 3 things. You could take 3 things and turn it into one document. It's going to depend on what this group decides.
Right. That may map to 3 documents, or 1 document, or 2 documents, or 5 documents.
But we have 3 deliverables.
Right. And we can ship them together as a set or in succession. It's a little bit flexible in that sense. Of course, if they're not useful without each other, then that applies to each one. Please after each other.
And there's also like references, what we call normative references. So like some document, like when Mark talked about the RFC process, right, the editor process, there's like a holdback at that point, and something that's normative reference. It's not an RFC. The other document gets held back. At some point, even if we ship in a specific order, they may not get published in the same order.
Any other questions? Further comments from IETF folks?
I don't know that the Internet Engineering Steering Group was ever defined in your slides or said out loud.
So yeah, IESG. So that is the IETF leadership, or at least one flavor of the IETF leadership. So Mike, the area director that was introduced before, he's the area director, and so the ISG is the entire set of area directors for all the areas. There's a, what is it, 13? 14, thank you. A large set of them, and the IETF chair is included in that, and they collectively make the decisions. If you're interested in the nuances of that process, it's interesting. We can talk about that offline.
Yeah.
Yes.
One thing to clarify for people who aren't familiar with the IETF definition of contribution, because I know other standards groups have a process by which the only thing is a recognized contribution are things that are officially formatted and sent into the process. Under the IETF rules, anything that's said in this room or on the mailing list counts as an IETF contribution, and it follows the IETF IPR rules.
And indeed on GitHub as well.
And I'll
That funnels in.
so if you say it, it is contributed.
Yes.
Particularly if it's intended to change the outcome of the work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And to your point, right, there's like 3 major touch points for the IESG, like on the work we do. One of them is when the working group was created, like, the IESG has to positively confirm it, like that's already done. And the second thing is whenever we ship a document, right, like, so you saw this post-working group process, after the IETF last call, it goes and sits in front of the whole IESG. So when Mark talked about the director reviews and everything, all the ADs go through it, like the whole IESG goes through it, and somebody can put in a position called a discuss, which means that, like, until that's resolved, the document is stuck in the IESG. So there's like quite a bit of inside baseball kind of thing where, like, some documents require this many number of positive votes on them, and so on. So that's kind of like a place where you would actually see people validating something. So you can consider like similar to a vote, but like it's really something that we are talking about. I read this document, I'm okay with it proceeding, I really like this, I want this to proceed, that kind of thing happens in the IESG. And the third thing, like third touch point is the recharter when Mark talked about, right? Like the recharter is similar to kind of the, like, so the AD kind of puts it in front of the IESG, and the IESG needs to approve the recharter.
But I think for most working group participants, they're relatively insulated from that. It's happening kind of outside the working group. So to a large degree. Anything else? Okay. So I think we thought it would be worthwhile. I know there are a lot of people who know each other here, either from IETF participation or from the workshop we held last year in Washington, D.C. But we do have some new folks, and so we thought it'd be nice to briefly introduce everyone, just your name and your affiliation, if you like. And we'll start in the room, go around the room, and then we'll do online as well. So I'll start. My name is Mark Nottingham. I work for Cloudflare, but here I am not representing Cloudflare at all. I am just the working group chair.
Suresh Krishnan, I work for Cisco, same as Mark, like, I'm not representing Cisco, and really looking forward to the work on this.
My name is Rick Vink. I am an ISG member as a local AD, but not responsible for this specific working group. I'm coming here simply because I'm interested in AI. I work for Cisco as well.
Leonard Rosenthal, I work for Adobe and I chair the C2PA.
Well, my name is Timid Robot, and I work with Creative Commons.
Hey, my name is Hirochika Asai. I'm working for Preferred Networks Japan. Very nice to meet you.
Hello, my name is Derek. I work for Ericsson Research, an AI enthusiast. 30-year IETF experience.
I am Farzan Baidi. I started Digital Medusa to keep people online and facilitate their access to content and online services. Been in this space for the past 15 years.
Hey everyone, my name is Colin Miller. I'm here on behalf of Spawning.
Sorry, could folks speak up just a little bit?
Yeah, I'll just try that again. My name is Colin Miller. I'm here on behalf of Spawning.
Hi everyone, I'm Joseph Bradley. I work with the Tony Blair Institute. It's my first time at the IETF, but we published a report on issues including this one last week, and I'm very excited to be involved.
Matt Rogerson, I look at public policy for the Financial Times.
Brett Silver, I work in public policy for a company called Advance, which is the parent company of Condé Nast and Advance Mobile.
Martin Thompson, Mozilla. Yeah, creative with Ericsson Research, and I'm also a member of the IEPREF Internet Architecture Board.
Funding, I'm with Comcast Campus Universal Sky, we move studio, sports, theme parks, stuff.
Paul Keller, I'm with Open Future.
And Sonia Gupta, I work on IP policy at Microsoft.
Gary from Google, responsible for crawlers of Google and robots.txt at Google.
Fabrice Canel, I work for Microsoft for 28 years.
So remote folks, I'll go from what I can see here. Brian?
I'm Brian Newbold. I work on the AT protocol at Blue Sky.
Great. Next up, we have Leila.
Hello, I hope you can hear me okay. I'm Leila Magnini, I work for the European Commission.
Lovely, thank you. And I'm having difficulty scrolling this. Pierce? Oh, no, thank you. Pierce. Pierce?
Hi, yeah, I'm Piers O'Hanlon, work at BBC Research and Development.
Mike already introduced himself. Thank you, Mike. Sebastian?
Good morning, Sebastian Post, founder and CEO of Lithium, and I've been co-initiator of the ISCC and served as convener of the ISO working group on ISCC.
And Stefano.
Good morning. My name is Stefano Gentile, and I'm a policy and legal officer with the copyright unit with DG Connect at the European Commission. Thanks for having me.
Lovely. Did we miss anyone who was remote? Okay. Do we want to just take a 10-minute break? People get some beverages or use facilities, and then we'll get back to work. So come back at 5 after the hour, or just a little bit after that.
The beverages are this way.
Yes.
For the restroom, you need to go out, and then this is on your left.
Down the end.
Near the end. And don't throw away your badge. We won't print them again. Ideally, please bring them back tomorrow. Thank you.
And your badge is back. Okay, lovely.
There's a little cafeteria beyond the restrooms where you can buy snacks.
Yes. And we will offer you snack at noon if you.
And the restroom has the weirdest wash space.
It's very odd.
It is.
Yeah.
Like a water
So where's coffee?
Just outside.
Inside, like it has that wall, and then there's a cafeteria where you have to stay outside of the Microsoft thing with getting food and stuff.
What's more?
Oh, they've been there for a while. I'm
I'm not the information. I'm happy that you also suffered.
Yes.
Well, there's a not.
By directly, and how much fun it is getting to Brussels, passport control.
It was one of me.
Yeah, it's, you get through that passport line in 2 hours, you're lucky. So, yeah, no,
Yeah.
what's that? It would use. Well, you didn't fly in.
No,
Right.
But you
Oh.
have your case also.
And you also have a European government. Yeah. Oh, no. Hey,
Damn, no.
I've done it enough times that, you know, and that's at the front of the, and I was at the front of the line, and it took me 2 hours. The line goes all the way down that corridor. It's just crazy.
maybe just because of this, right?
Not all the time. Every single time I have flown.
Then you may just want to.
It's
I am from the airport because like that train takes you 2 2 hours. Well, actually, I put it in 1 hour, 50 minutes.
I was meant for.
No.
Yeah, that's my-
And everyone is super
I know, I'm very tempted to start doing that, flying to a different country. Paris also has automated passport control, which is much easier too. Yes.
So go to border control, so like with the train, like where you go to Belgium border control and then you go to. Yeah, you also have your passport with you, and I'm like, yeah, sure, I have my passport. So like, they let me face the UK, I'm really looking for my passport, it turns out it's my passport, but I had to grab my daughter's.
Oh, no.
And they were like, we can't let you in. And then I got like, because I was already outside of Belgium.
Oh my God.
And inside, so now I'm trying to got it, so we had like, night, say, goes long. Oh, wow. It's like, I'm virtually thrown out of the country. And then it turns out, like, then I call my daughter, so it's not a figure out what's fine. Really, like, I didn't throw my passport. She said, you have to be here. I wish I had a and I actually have my passport. Then with the just entry denied, and like the last second, I just got on the Eurostar. Like, so weirdest example of being like actually like it's not necessarily important, but like entry denied, they put you on the side. And
Well, and it shows up on your record. Like, if you ever had to entry denied in the country.
Exactly. That's what I'm wondering. Like, I don't know, like since this week or something, you need to have like the Europeans also use like something like an ESTA like to go to the UK.
Yes.
And it's like just requirement, so they never get denied.
Exactly.
Oh.
I accidentally that account.
It is
It is.
like I
He's got
think
the
it's a
official
completely
mandate.
cheaper, like I think they maybe needed it to get me back into Belgium, like to be able to, you're not supposed to walk in that direction to the Belgian border control. Like I think that was the main reacting.
Just use your phone.
Yeah.
Next.
I had bad experience on the train, just with ridiculous.
It doesn't connect with us on Wi-Fi.
It's just like, the good thing since Paris and Eurostar merged, like, the highest, like, Eurostar, and then the two disappear.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Like, they are, like, there's actually, you have a nice lounge, and like, all the kiosks and entrances also not counting. They actually have, like, they actually very nice. They have a lounge here where they make some cocktails on it. There's something I could
Oh, that's sort of unheard of.
No, that's actually like for, it doesn't really matter, like on that sort of Brussels thing, like you just go, like you just enter the train, right? Like there's no control, no queues, but like since it expands for the London operation, like the London trains are much nicer.
They lose the respect for you if you say, well, you know, can't take like everything is so positive, right?
I don't know.
You're not gonna be friendly with our future.
Are we in the initial stage?
Masters.
Are we still in the initial stage?
No, you'd be surprised what the end state is. Oops.
I did use for next earlier. I would never forget it. I'm so happy, the weather is good.
Is it?
Yes, oh my God, this is the best weather in Brussels. Any other time I've been there, it's been raining and gray, and it's awful. This weather, you see, like from here, I'm in Brussels. I spent 7 days raining and awful and gray. I went to London and I was like, oh, the beautiful weather here. You know.
That's fucking It's just floating down now. Going on about how nice the weather is and wearing shorts. I'm like, this is freezing.
Oh no, this is excellent.
If I check this one down.
You know, in June, I came there in June and it was freezing. In June. Yeah, and it rains all the time. And it's not like beautiful London rain. It's like pouring.
As a Londoner, it's very flattering to hear someone talk about beautiful London rain.
Yeah.
It never feels that way when you're there.
I think Brussels weather-wise is worse than that. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Where is he? Why is he not here? Is he not interested?
He's another fish to fry.
Ah.
This is not his jig right
Hey Mark.
Good to meet you, yeah.
Likewise. How are you?
Pretty good, pretty good.
When do we get sat in the hot seat?
Oh, this is the hot seat, yes.
Yes.
We'll see if something's really bad.
Yeah, you're gonna get back at the front. I had a question I forgot to answer when you put up the white paper format, which was if people are going to submit draft documents for adoption. I've noticed those that are currently up are very nicely formatted and being set up in the appropriate thing. For people who are new to IETF, how essential is that layout? Is it not useful?
If you want it to be adopted, it needs to be in the draft. And there is a tool chain that makes that very easy. You just write Markdown if you're familiar with Markdown, and everything is kind of automated. But you need to get up to speed that tool chain. We can do that. What I'd suggest is we already have 2 drafts right now. We really do need just a starting point, and then we will start rearranging and changing it past recognition very quickly. And so I wouldn't worry too much about that at this point. It's more, we need to get some documents adopted and start talking about, okay, how do these documents need to change? But if you have ideas, I'd say, practically speaking, one of the best things to just figure out how to structure those ideas and put them down list as, okay, we thought about see how we can do things. Here's the ideas.
I've read the ones that are already up, and I'll see and watch how we do it.
From my perspective, it's most useful to choose the most minimal documents tightly defined, so that it's easier to add to them and change them if they're small. If they're sprawling documents with lots of details, then that's more to evaluate, more to cut out and change.
You've got to reread the whole thing from scratch. Is it great to be on YouTube?
Maybe
that's good.
You don't, not for you can if you want to, but you the only reason why managing this is the first one I've used Meetup for remote meetings, so yes, they didn't have this available for remote meetings. It's a tool that didn't work for a long time. Actually, no.
It was in an IETF tool.
It's a tool by an Italian company that they kind of do it almost. They have other customers, but they highly customize it for the IETF that iterate and they're very active. So they are technically contractors for the IETF, but it feels like the design for our tool.
Oh, that's nice. It's special.
Yeah. It's we have a lot of bespoke tools that we invest a lot in that you step back and you're like,
if you were with the engineering passport, it would be on you didn't have a couple of thousand.
That's true.
I'll keep checking.
Yeah.
And if you're not there,
then people make fun of the tool because I'm up to survey. Such is life. Couplers children exist.
I'll share it later with you, so you probably get started. But I think it's verified. Like it's not, it seems to have been published. But it shows all the matrices and disinformation in chatbots. It's got some amazing things. I'm just reading it. That's what I should. But like it's not much.
Well,
Was it more about problems?
yeah.
But you know, I mean, certainly one last week. Based on what they've been spearfishing with chatbots.
Yeah.
So they've been doing it in the same way I think Keystone did.
Right. Specifically focused on how to make those voices just
It's chatbots in general. Yeah. You're particularly worried about overview.
I just think, yeah, it does need.
No, but
Right.
Your background on this researching as well.
So what's the, it's an interpret to say.
So, yeah, let's go ahead and get started.
I haven't had any trouble.
Just checking, has everyone been able to get onto the network? Has everyone resolved their issues around that?
No, I didn't. I had some trouble getting on.
Okay, and you have the password and everything?
I have a password, no, but I'm using my phone, so.
Okay.
That's fine.
Because a few people have had trouble, but I think they eventually worked it out. So,
Okay.
persist, I guess, I'm not sure.
I'm hoping I'll be one of them.
Okay. All right, so we have a very loose agenda for the meeting. We didn't ask for a lot of presentations or anything. We were going to, as we said before, keep it at just a discussion level. And what we thought was that today we'd start talking about the vocabulary and see how that goes. And then if we're able to conclude that discussion today with, in my mind, what I'd like to see is a notion of which draft we want to adopt as the basis, as that starting point. And again, it really is just a starting point for the vocabulary output. And some initial thoughts about what needs to be discussed and what might need to be changed in that document. So, some formative issues. And then if we can conclude that discussion today, or perhaps push into tomorrow morning, depending on how things go. And then after that, we'll talk about attachment and probably start with a focus on the location-based attachment, and then see how have a similar discussion around that. If we can do those two things, I know we also have the deliverable of that kind of overview of combining things. But I think even in this meeting, if we can get both of those kind of launched and then take to the mailing list, the meeting, we concluded that these were the good starting points and these are the set of issues that we might need to start discussing. That would be a good outcome for this meeting. And we'll talk on Thursday about kind of our next steps, how we're going. We can kind of take a status check of, how much progress we were able to make with hopefully having some substantive discussion of what we think the issues are. And that will lead us to, evaluating our timeline, whether we're going to need another interim meeting, and how that's going to work. So we'll finish up with that kind of discussion on Thursday. Does that seem like a reasonable approach to the week?
Yes.
I see lots of nodding heads. And I'm conscious, remote folks, if you have comments, just please put yourself in the queue. Oh, I see we have another person. Alyssa, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Hi, my name is Alyssa. I work at the Knight Georgetown Institute. Was I supposed to say something else?
No, that's the level we're at. Thank you. It's great to see you here, Alyssa. So with that in mind, do we have the document list?
Can I suggest a structure to the first day's conversation?
Sure.
There's a few things that I think are most interesting to me to resolve in the vocabulary area. Mm-hmm. The first one is the thing we discussed in Bangkok that a number of people here won't have been present for, which was this idea that you can opt in, you can opt out, and you can say nothing. And those three states were the three states that kind of mattered for each one of the things that you were talking about. And we'll have to resolve the set of things that you might be able to say these things about. The second one that I think is interesting is the question of whether the rules apply to the acquisition of content, or to its use in training, or to the ultimate use of the thing that is trained. And that to me, I think, is quite an interesting discussion to have. The third one is obviously the set of things that you might want to say something about. We've had a lot of discussions about that during the workshop. I think we're starting to resolve on that one, but it would be good to work through that one in more detail. And for me, the most interesting one of that set in terms of making decisions is the question of whether search, indexing, and whatnot is in scope for the work. And I think that's a hard one because it's not, it may interlock with the location-based things that we're discussing. If we're talking about hitting robots.txt, that exists for the purpose of search, in some people's minds at least. And having to grapple with the question maybe.
Yeah, I remember watching the video. Unfortunately, I couldn't be at the Bangkok meeting, and that struck me as a good summary, especially the tri-state discussion. I was a little frustrated. I wasn't there for that because I had a lot of thoughts about it.
Right.
But we have to be very aware in this group of the limits of what we're defining, in that these are technical mechanisms, and they're going to describe preferences, but they need to be working within a legal context. We do not define that legal context. And so we need to be very aware of what the limits of what we're doing are.
How would you mean, hands up or?
For now, hands up in the room is fine, and remote people, if you just
It's
press
on
the
the
key
screen,
button.
so all of us can see that aside from you.
I can't, exactly. So just
We'll just flag it.
Sure,
I
I should
can.
keep an eye on it. Yes. So go ahead, please.
So one of the concerns, I think. Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. I apologize. With that exchange, I lost my train of thought. I'm still jet lagged. So
That's okay. I can relate to
I'm
that.
gonna raise it when I remember what it was. So my apologies.
I think to pull the thread back, Mark was talking like we're working inside a legal framework, and like we're trying to do like the technical pieces that feed into that.
Thank you, Suresh. So I'm wondering if ultimately when we write some of this down, it would be very good to capture the limitations of what the scope that we intend to apply to are. Because one of the concerns I've had is that we will have parties or groups after this one take up this work and say, well, the IETF said it can be done this way, and therefore I'm going to apply it to these other contexts and these other situations which we did not intend for, and that we did not work through the dynamics of in our deliberations.
Thank you. But there's a nuance on what you said. You said it needs to work within a legal framework. It needs to work within a number of possible legal frameworks. There may be more than one. Well, there will be, yes. But to your point, I personally think that one of the best deliverables we can put out, which isn't explicit in our charter, but I think follows on very naturally from it, is that we need a guide to policymakers who are considering this mechanism to say that this is what it does and this is what it doesn't do. And if you want to use it effectively for a policy purpose, consider these things as you do so. And I think we can come up with a list of those things.
And to that point, if policymakers or legal frameworks ultimately deviate from what we have expected and what we have discussed, then there will probably be a necessity to either go back here or abandon this work to fit into whatever it is they've decided, if they've really changed some aspect or assumptions that we've gone into. I mean, I realize this is very vague, but the worry is that policy people can sometimes open up new frontiers,
sure,
and then drag past technical solutions forward into those new frontiers, and they don't really fit, and they cause more problems sometimes than they solve.
And I think we're in a place where we're being a little entrepreneurial about defining the shape from our perspective, and hopefully it'll be collaborative with the different policy efforts that are happening. We'll have to adapt as we go on, both in the small time scale and in the larger time scale.
I think, like Mark, like to your point about the tri-state discussion, right? I think the thing to like Glenn's point was that we try to provide the signals, right? And the lack of the signal could be interpreted differently in different legal frameworks. I think that's kind of the point we need to make somewhere.
Yes.
I think it's probably made in some of the documents, and we talk about the workshop conclusion as well, that we won't fill in all the things, but maybe it's worth writing down somewhere, like probably in the site or something.
I would like us to be extremely explicit about it. Yeah, personally.
In particular, I'm worried about secondary use cases that don't even exist yet in our minds, because this is an evolving business landscape from the AI perspective, and there may be uses or approaches or technology that we haven't even considered yet that may appear on the surface. And yeah,
I think that the tri-state is a very useful construct, but to Mark's point, you can write legislation that says no matter what anyone expresses, it doesn't matter. These are the rules. And I think the EU TDM legislation basically points at research as something that is protected as an activity that can be conducted by someone that effectively ignores preferences in certain circumstances. And obviously that would be subject to ethics review boards and various other things, and they sort of rely on that in having made that decision. On the other hand, you can choose to respect people's opinions, and legislation will in certain contexts establish a default. All of that, I think, is reasonable, and we'll be able to fit within that sort of framework. I don't know that there's anything more that we can do without getting into specific terms of use that someone might have for the use of their content and whatnot. I've had a number of discussions with people who are like, well, a simple expression like the ones that you're considering aren't really suitable for the sorts of agreements that I would like to have with, for instance, this particular AI company. And I think we have to set expectations here. We're not going to be able to accommodate all of those potential uses. And there will be a need for bilateral agreements between different entities that go into a whole lot more detail than we can. That's fine. Those will override whatever it is that comes through this work.
I don't completely agree with you, and that's, Leonard Rosenthal. So we've talked about this on the mailing list as well, which is, to me, there is a fourth state, which is the, but with criteria. And we can ignore whether or not the way in which those criteria are defined are part of the protocol. You know, it could be some, and you look at things like TDM rep today, it says, go look over here, you know, but it doesn't matter. So we can keep that at secondarily, but there absolutely needs to be, I would put forth that you need a way to say, contact me, or there's more information, come see me, you know, even if it's just that.
Sorry, for the notes, was that TDM rep?
TDM rep, yes, Tom, David, Mary.
Yeah.
And that's defined in the W3C community.
Correct, yes, sorry.
I just wanted to second that. Very interested in pursuing models of reciprocity and being able to create kind of set models of reciprocity that crawlers could comply with. You know, so with criteria, I think would be very valuable for preventing a data winter.
So this is maybe a good discussion to have at the start. It's about the expectations around the work. And this goes to, you know, we have a very aggressive charter. We're supposed to ship the documents that were the original deliverables in August. And so that is not a lot of time. So if we want to keep to that timeline, then we need to be very realistic about what we're shipping. And I think the way one could do that is by shipping a minimal core, proving we can crawl before we walk as a group, because as we know, this is already a very crowded space. And then recharter, as we discussed before, to do extensions that are more elaborate, perhaps.
If you want to do a quick follow-up, it's fine, but Martin is pending.
So, and I'm not done. So that's a discussion I think we should have, and I think it'd be very useful if we can use this meeting to get a shared understanding of what we think our timeline is going to be and what's realistic in that timeline for this first chunk of work. And I will emphasize it is only the first chunk of work. I think my view is that because of the regulatory environment that we're in, and because there's so much going on, it would behoove us to ship something extremely minimal, maybe only one or two kind of options in the vocabulary, and then prove that we as a group are productive in that sense, and immediately recharter to do perhaps more interesting things. But so that's my initial view. It'd be great to hear from everyone about how we think we should achieve this work.
I agree with that view. I just want to make sure that we don't prevent the future. That's all.
Sure. And that's extensibility is a large part of that, to make sure we don't lock off any pathways yet.
So I think there's a number of ways you can view that particular request. And I think this is exactly what most people in the publisher industry would like to be able to do, is they would like to be able to say, on my terms, please come talk to me. And that I've heard that from numerous people. From my perspective, within that sort of tri-state thing, no is the beginning of a negotiation, right? That's not universal across all cultures, but there's also cultures where no is the starting point for a discussion. And if you're able to then take that no and go and find the contact details of the person who's provided that content and go and talk to them, then you have the means to get exactly what you're talking about. And I think we could deliver something that does the tri-state thing while enabling exactly what you're asking for, simply through those means.
I agree with Brad. I agree with this, but I think that in terms of what you're saying yes or no to, the question of search does creep in. So we might have to move back on that, because while you might be saying yes to calling or scraping for the purposes of Gen AI, as soon as you begin to mix an element of search in with that, most publishers would like to appear in search, but they may not like to appear in generative AI search results. So that is at least the one use case that I can think of as being sort of a little bifurcation of part of the tri-state, and I think it falls definitely into that fundamental layer. And then perhaps to Leonard's point, there's a second layer of permissions as to like, no, but you can do X number of things which are a little bit more granular in nature, some of which I think were mentioned in one or two of the papers that we've seen. But I'm just wondering, like, how long does that list have to be, or how short can that list be to kind of satisfy the core needs of publishers?
Yeah. I'm sorry, can you remind me of your name?
Bradley Silver.
Thank you.
Leonard, interesting as we're sitting here in Brussels. So there is, and related to the time, what we can do and what we should do in the time frame. So there's active work going on in the European Commission, not too far from here, where one of the considerations is around machine readability for these states. I mean, that's a big part of what we're trying to do. It's not about humans, it's about machines. And I think that's one of the reasons that we need to have, that just saying no is not enough. That there needs to be at least that point of extensibility, if you will, that enables what they are actively trying to do not too far from here. And to the other piece to that, and to what you were saying, Mark, is that I don't think that I think we have to do something quickly. I don't disagree with that, but we can't I don't believe we can stop short just because we're on a time frame, because there are a lot of people, many in this room are on the call and elsewhere, who are waiting for the vocabulary work from here to then build upon. And I think if we don't do at least enough core work up front, we're not going to help the rest of the world.
I think like Mark already talked about the extensibility piece being in there. I think the other thing we talked about during the meeting in Bangkok, and probably before that as well, is that like people are free to go work on things, right? Like in a term, if you want to kind of go back and like find a bunch of people in this group, like go work on some document, get the draft out, like nothing is really stopping you. Like we cannot progress this to the past the working group, that's fine, but nothing stops people from working on things that you think are interesting as long as it doesn't stop the progress on the main deliverables, right? So feel free to go find like smaller groups to work on and bring stuff back to the group whenever it's ready.
But I do agree with you that this really is all about finding what that minimal set is. And too simple is not a good answer either. Yeah.
Thanks. Media, then Alyssa, remotely, then Ted.
Yeah, Mia Kuliman. I think the challenge really is that we don't know what the future uses are. And like, I think AI search is already one of those cases where it's really not so clear what it is and where it goes. And so we need to, I think, we need to start with like a small set and then hopefully have some extensibility so we can add easily things later for the preference. But I also wanted to ask quickly a very concrete question, because you said, I thought the AI search is usually the case where people don't want AI, but they want search. And so they want AI search, and you said people maybe want search, but they don't want AI search.
Yeah, right. Yeah,
So what's that? Because you don't even want to have your data in some AI model at all? Or
yeah, that's right. I mean, I think that for the purposes of your content being collected, you want to appear in search results so people can find you, but you don't necessarily want your content summarized in search results so that people don't have to come and look for you, because everything they want to know is in the results themselves.
Yeah, so I think this is the kind of thing that we need to capture. It's like, it's okay to use this data as long as you link back. That's kind of what we want, which is again something
It depends
else.
on.
Yeah.
Sorry, Matt from the EFT. It depends the volume content that's taken from the article, where the links is. So all the kind of like
Matt, can you speak up?
All the ways in which that content is presented and where the link sits. Like AI search is very, very different to traditional link search, which is just a very small snippet and a blue link. But AI search, like I think the test that we've seen, reduce click-through rate to about 5% of what it is for normal link search.
So I mean, the high-level point is that I have the feeling we don't even really know what AI search is yet. It's keep changing, right? So we should rather maybe figure out what the properties are we want.
Thank you. Do you want to make a point?
Well, yeah, I think we know enough about what AI search looks like for now. I think that's going to be the case for all the preferences that we express. And I think that the hope is, of course, that a lot of the no's are going to turn to yeses when there are uses which publishers and others are going to be more comfortable with, and there will be mechanisms, hopefully through work like this group is doing, to express consent and permission to do things that they might otherwise not do now. So I think that the no category is going to be the most important piece, what you're actually able to say no to, because a lot of users are yet unknown. And of course, you know, as has been said, no doesn't necessarily mean that your permission is never going to be granted. It means that we don't want you to crawl, but if you do want to do other things, of course, that is always subject to discussion. It's, you know, these are machine readable signals. They are not no entry signs with a big barricade and barbed wire around. It's just a signal, the very first thing we hear when we enter.
Yeah, I mean, maybe this also, I totally understand your motivation, but maybe this is something we should discuss, because it's a different way to develop the protocol. The default is no, and then you have to, every time there's a new use case, you have to add something, and then this is a very slow process, rather than the default is more like yes, and then if you take something you don't want, you add it, right? So this is a different dynamic. I know there are different preferences from different actors on that, but I think we should consider that carefully.
Okay, so
So you were running a queue, but you seem to have abandoned it.
no, it's like I think Bradley was responding to media. So like Alyssa, Ted, Paul, Glenn, Joe. Yeah. Alyssa, go ahead.
Yeah, I had a follow-up question for Leonard when you were talking about the work in the European Commission and institutions around things being machine readable. Were you saying that that's specifically extending to machine readability of here's how I reach a point of contact with whom I can negotiate, or just like in general?
So the work
Because I read that to be the point that was being made, like that's an extensibility point that people want specifically.
Well, actually, the work that I'm familiar with and helping with is actually to declare detailed rights. So for example, it could be something as simple as here's who I am, contact me, but it could also be very detailed declarations of pay me €5 if you want access to this, or I would like this much per month, per page, whatever. So it wants to be an extensible machine readable system. And this is, as I said, active work at the commission. And I'm happy I'll see if I can dig up a link and show it.
So I think we're rat rolling. Yay! You all got to hear the term a little bit earlier, and I think we're in one now, and I think we may be in the wrong rat hole in particular. Because when we're talking about vocabulary, we're trying to figure out what people are going to do once they read the preference. And I think we have some really interesting stuff already on the table. And I want to pull out something Fabrice said, possibly without intending to. And that is, we have the opportunity here for the crawler itself to make reference to what it's read. So if we're imagining something that's very robots.txt like, where there's a set of conditions which are being expressed and said, if you do this, you can do that. If you like this, you can do that. One of the simplest things we could do is associate those conditions with, say, a nonce. And then when the crawler comes, it can present that nonce to demonstrate, one, it has read the set of conditions, and which one it believes it's acting on. So that the source can then present things appropriately for somebody who's signing up for that. Now this is very, very basically machine readable in that all you're really doing is creating a very header-like thing. And when Fabrice was talking about this on the mailing list, I thought, oh, he's going to shove it into the user agent. It'll be there forever, but it will work. Because we've seen so many other things done like that. I think there really are things we can do here, building on sort of a minimalist approach and not a tri-state where it's opt-in, opt-out silence. I mean, silence is always going to be problematic, but where when you opt in, you can say more than I'm opting into the conditions in the AI.txt or whatever. You can opt into a specific segment of them that's referenceable by the user. So I think we can get much more expressive here relatively cheaply. And that it may be more important for us to talk about what we want the vocabulary to do rather than to talk about sort of the context absent what we're trying to get the vocabulary to do. Because I think there's a real chance that we're going to be in a rat hole for at least the rest of the morning and maybe. Sorry.
Yes, Paul Keller. So I'm a bit torn, but I feel like a lot of the things that are discussed here right now are things that are addressed in the draft that I submitted. At least there's ideas about that. They cover broadly these things, and it's based on lots of previous conversations. So I feel it's probably a good idea to maybe also work on the documents that are already here before rat holing into some of the issues that are being discussed in my draft and also some of the others.
Thanks, Bob. I think it's Glenn.
Yeah, I was going to make the observation. Am I loud enough?
Yes.
Okay. Don't get accused of being too soft. It does seem like maybe we could get through some of this world and not grapple if we started writing down, or took a work out trying to write down some of this stuff. In the vocabulary draft today, we have a small sections that talk about what is I'm accomplishing this, and then go right into the vocabulary proposal. It seems like we need to document and capture some of this argument and that thinking through so that we have it on paper, text, and that we can then agree on that is the thing we're working on. And that'll maybe help us get past rapidly just revisiting this. So maybe as we're working on it, we need to do that.
Thanks. I think, can I make like one quick statement to Paul, like regarding Ted? I think like Ted was talking about like some kind of indication that somebody has like seen your signal and come back with it. I think that's not in the draft right now. So
No one
at least at a subunit level, I think that's
No, but
probably-
that is probably also not part of the vocabulary as such, right? Like the
No.
vocabulary, the way I understand the vocabulary, and I think the way it's also in the charter, is a vocabulary that's independent of any attachment mechanism and any other types of mechanisms, right? Like this is, for me, it's important to think vocabulary as something that is useful for this group, that is useful for other groups working on this, and that ensures a sort of conceptual interoperability between systems that are, as we speak, developed in different places, right? Like, so it's interpretive guidance, if you will, almost, rather than, and I think the question then how to implement that in specific contexts, like I think here the context is probably how do crawlers understand and deal with the preference signals that are communicated is a concern here. In other contexts, there may be other concerns, right?
No, makes sense. I just wanted to make the point that that's not covered.
Yeah, no, it wasn't. It wasn't a direct comment to Ted. It was more like seeing that.
And to be clear, we're having a somewhat free-flowing discussion now, mostly to let people feel that they're being heard and to get kind of the scope of where we're thinking on the table. I agree with Ted that if we're rattling for the rest of the meeting here, we've got a problem, but it's okay to have kind of a wide-ranging discussion just to kind of air the issues and get a sense of the scope we're at. But we'll definitely focus up, if not after lunch, before that.
So I think Joseph.
Hi, Joe Bradley. I think that trying to avoid the rat hole, one of the problems, or one way of seeing the work of this group is robots.txt is not enough to communicate certain things. And that's because it seems to have been designed in an era where there was one kind of technology and economy combination that everyone understood and there was a settlement on it. The issue that we have now is not so much this new tech. Some of the tech's been around for a while. It's been suddenly used in new ways. And the combination of the technology and the use cases, people aren't okay with it. What this means is that if we're going to have a vocabulary, it's going to have to be extensible because there will be tech today that's going to be used in different ways in 2, 5, 10 years' time. And there's also an asymmetry in that once data is out on the internet, it's very hard to get back in. So I think whilst I appreciate the need for a standard that kind of lets you do stuff and says, come talk to me, if you don't have a fairly strong ability to say no outside of these very clearly defined use cases like search or some clearly defined kind of rack, you will very quickly have situations where someone's gone, gee, my content was scraped for some fancy new technique and or economy, and I'm upset because I can never get the data back in once the toothpaste search.
I'll put you in the queue. Sonia next.
Thanks. I guess just to comment on Joe and Mia's comment, it's quite important, I guess, how we structure the vocabulary and whether we start with a broad no and then decide whether or not it's useful to have narrow opt-ins within that broader no. It seems to me that that would be the less extensible way than actually identifying what we want to prevent and have the list of exclusions, because there, as we move forward, there will be new technologies that don't create concerns, and that will create that barrier of adoption if the default essentially is no.
I think Sebastian is next, Martin, Tim, and then Miriam.
So just with regards to the opt-in, opt-out discussion, I wanted to note or to discuss, to bring into the discussion what kind of message we are dealing in. Because in my understanding, a no, like an opt-out, is a public declaration, whereas a yes would require terms that are, in most cases that I'm aware of, confidential. So it also requires public access to contact information, which is kind of a tricky thing to achieve. And it requires public access to machine-readable terms. And so I would echo and support the idea to start with the opt-out and then move to extensions of the protocol of the kind of proposal of the work, and consider opt-in as a signal rather than and as an extension.
What's that mean?
Yeah.
Oh, geez. I don't know how to follow that. So we've spent a lot of time sort of talking about the back and forth about different ideas, but I suspect that based on this discussion, I'm not sure that we're all clear on what the set of proposals are. And I was going to suggest that maybe we set aside some time this morning to get ourselves oriented in terms of the vocabularies that people are proposing and how they might be applied. Maybe not all the details, but how you attach yes or no to something, because it seems like there's a few people who aren't quite tracking that. Just a suggestion.
Timid robot. Going back to the idea that my information is out on the internet and I can't get it back, I think that speaks to when do the rules apply. And I would hope that the preferences would have a broad application, not just the acquisition, but that there would be an expectation at an absolute minimum with RAG and possibly prior to training as well. That if someone pulls Common Crawl from 2 years ago, they're checking robots.txt or whatever today, if they're training today.
But I think that is an issue that we'll need to capture. Yeah, and that was discussed in the workshop.
Yeah, me a comment. I actually wanted to add to this point. So initially when robot.txt came up, it was really about the crawling itself. It was about the technical hurdle that the crawling put like performance issues into the systems, and you wanted to stop the crawling. And that's not what we're talking about here. It's really about how the data is used. So because we keep saying, you know, that the data is out there, you can't take it back. That data is out there, right? You put it on a website, everybody can see it, a human can see it, a machine can see it, or whatever. It's really about the data that has been crawled, how is it used? So it's really important to make also sure that this usage is extendable, and also that we keep this information together with the data when we keep processing it. I think that's what we're talking about.
Thanks, mate. Just to try and understand Ted's point a bit more in terms of, it felt like what you were saying was to be almost like a read receipt from the crawler. Once they'd read the robots.txt, well, they'd read the signal. The crawler would then like have some kind of receipt to say that it obeyed the signal. Is that correct? Because I was just thinking, does that mean that it essentially means that the crawler is then auditable?
So imagine that we're using sort of a meta system like the Caprisa system where you say, hey, I'm going to have a portion of this which describes the permissions associated with RAG or associated with research or associated with search. Each one of those stanzas can have something in it that's basically a nonce. And so you as a crawler could say, I can prove to you that I have seen your statement by including in my request this nonce that tells you, one, I've read your document, and two, which use case I believe I'm calling under.
Right.
More importantly, you can then, if you change your robots.txt, if somebody presents a stale nonce, just like with an e-tag, you could force them back into reviewing the robots.txt. So we don't have to treat this as a system where the preferences can't be acknowledged by the crawlers. We can treat it as a system where the crawlers use the fact that the preferences are machine readable to indicate it. Now, this does not apply to some of the issues that he raised with other forms of distribution, right? If you're not doing a web-based distribution, but you're carrying it along with a particular movie or image or whatever, this doesn't work. So I'm not suggesting that this is a panacea, just that I think if we start digging into this, we can find ways to build up a relatively simple machine readable vocabulary that lets us go beyond a tri-stage to within the yes, you're allowed, to saying exactly which clause of I'm allowed you are part of.
So
Is that helpful?
Yeah, my point being, does it create a kind of auditable transparency about what a caller is taking effectively?
I'm going to insert myself there to say my inclination is that that is an interesting idea, but it sounds more like a negotiation mechanism for the purpose of something like audit, which is out of charter for us. And moreover, it may be problematic because, as was discussed at the workshop, it conflates crawl time with use time.
Is that a chair comment or an individual?
Part of it is a chair comment. Part of it. I'll leave it for you to decide. I'm not saying it's out of scope now. I'm concerned that this is potentially out of scope, but also somewhat speculative and complex. And based upon our timeline and the work in front of us, it may be something we could grow into. But I'm a little nervous about spending substantial time on it now.
And just seeking clarification on that comment, I recognize the need to delineate crawl time and train time or other application time. Are we, is what you're saying that we're only focusing on crawl time with this specification?
No, not at all.
Okay, sorry. So we're trying to encapsulate all
I think that's one of the things we need to have an explicit discussion about.
Okay, great. Yeah, my suggestion would be that if we can get a syntax, a vocabulary that encompasses all of that, that would be.
One of the interesting parts of all this is robots.txt is explicitly a crawl time artifact. At least that's how it's used to date. And we're talking about potentially putting something genuinely different in there.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess on the heels of that, I think AI.txt is a great blank slate for that.
Attachment is tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about opt-in versus opt-out and some of the motivation that I personally see around it. So there's a couple of factors here. One factor is that, and by the way, I'm a supporter of opt-in. I understand opt-out, but I also support opt-in. Part of that is because we are seeing some rapid business models evolve around content and usage of content. And so if we have an opt-out model, unless the default opt-out is that everything is opted out, which then sort of gets you back into an opt-in model. We have the problem of how do we deal with the situation of new uses come up after the specification and the setting of some text thing that we haven't even considered here. So I'll give you an example that's emerging in the content industry for movies, and that is the actors entering into agreements or making offers of agreements to AIs to allow them to be used in training. So you saw this sort of reverse of this with the Scarlett Johansson voice training done last year, where a AI voice was training on Scarlett Johansson, and she said, no, you can't do that. I have not authorized that. We need to take some other corrective action. But we've also started to see systems emerge by where actors can say, I will enter into training agreements for my pattern of speech, my recognition, my face, my mannerisms. Here's how you do that. Make me an offer. Here's my contact my agent. I'm open for work. So we do. That seems to be a positive use of this technology to enable a new business model. The worry is that while we see that on the horizon, there may be others coming down as well as AI companies become more clever in what they can use with data. And so one of the worries with a opt-out model is that unless it's done correctly, there may be future uses which get pulled in and say, well, you didn't tell me I couldn't do that. You didn't opt out of that use. So that's one concern, I think, from a content creative works perspective we have with this. The other one is that there's aspects here which are both copyright driven, so legal regimes, but there's aspects here which are not copyright driven, such as the cadence of my voice, the other trainable features of content that can be extracted and discussed here. And so far, some of the grammars I've looked at don't have that distinction between those different training modalities that are possible with the technology. And so that gets me back again to the opt-in. If I had an opt-in model where I could say, this is the one allowing, everything else is off the table, that's an easier expression to cover from my perspective. So just as we have this opt-in, opt-out discussion, that's sort of where I'm coming from.
So I think we need to be really clear about this. We crafted the charter in a certain way to talk about preferences. Ultimately, whether the model is opt-out or opt-in is according to the legal regime you're working within. We cannot control that. I think based on discussion so far, we have said that we want to accommodate both an opt-in and an opt-out legal regime. But we cannot speak to that in this room or determine what the actual model that's being used in this room.
Okay, sure.
Bradley, I'll put you in the queue.
Oh, sorry.
Gary's been waiting for a while.
Any idea what I wanted to say? So side note to Ted and a few others. Whatever we are designing here, we are designing for crawlers that are ready to obey these things. If I wanted to write a crawler that doesn't obey anything, it would probably take me 1 hour and bring up 1,000 instances and scrape a large publication that was mentioned in DC at one point. And I could easily ignore all restrictions that or preferences that you put in place. For that, you have other mechanisms to prevent, like WAFs and whatever, which perhaps once we recharter should be in the charter, but right now it is not. And then the other thing that I wanted to say that was, I forgot, sorry. That was it.
Right. Okay, so if somebody wants to get in the queue, put your hand up, otherwise like the queue ends with all. Okay. So Ted and then Matt.
There's someone in the queue on the screen, Ryan.
Okay, I'll put Brian at the end.
Yeah, am I in the queue?
Are you?
Who's next?
Bradley's next.
Okay.
Can you put your hand up again, just to make sure?
So I think that we are getting tripped up on some of the nomenclature around opt-in, opt-out, because a lot of those concepts are shaped around legal regimes. My understanding of the vocabulary that we're here to articulate is that it should in fact be to some extent agnostic to the legal regime in which it is situated. And the legal regime may give that vocabulary additional meaning depending on what legislators want to do. So in the US, there is no per se exception, and so there is no such thing as an opt-out. There is fair use, which is something different, and that's a whole other story. The UK, EU, also a different story. I think that what we do want to do and what would be helpful for this group to accomplish is to make some sort of statement about the implications of doing nothing, of not having a signal. Because right now, we can't ignore the pervasive misconception that not having a signal equals consent. And that is something I think that is one of the significant problems that publishers have had, both when it comes to addressing the technological implications, the policy implications, the legal implications of scraping, crawling activity that happens online. So I don't think we need to think about it in terms of opting in or opting out, but I do think we need to state that no signal does not imply a preference whatsoever, and that the legal regime that is in place will apply. I mean, it seems like it's just the most factual, non-controversial thing to say, perhaps, but I do think it would be important to start with that as a baseline.
I think that's like a clear outcome from the meeting in Bangkok was like, that was like exactly what you said. So I think that.
But you said two different things just now.
We said first, no signal implies no consent. Touch, and second is no signal implies that the regime applies. Because in the EU context, to be clear, the no signal has a very clear meaning that means it's okay to use this.
That's not true. That's not true because the signal is not the only means by which you can express a preference. It is one of the means.
The
So-
absence of any, but the absence of any signal in the EU copyright context gives you the right to make use of a copyrighted work under the scope of an exception.
In that context, though.
And it's clear like there's some definitional work around what a valid signal is. I think that is to some degree what we're addressing here. I think it's also some discussions that happen outside of this room where it goes with other types of signals. But like the point is like if your second point about saying like then it defaults to the default of the legal regime you operate.
Right.
And that's then I'm with you.
That is what that is what I mean. It doesn't imply that no consent means no. It just means that there isn't positive consent.
It means go talk to your lawyer.
Yes.
Paul, is that what you wanted to say, or do you want to say?
No, I wanted to say another thing. Yeah, it actually builds sort of on Gary's thing. Like I think it's really important that a lot of people who are looking at this work from the outside conflate these two issues, right? Like they conflate the issue that somehow signals that we are producing here will solve their problems about getting hammered from crawlers, the costs that are associated with. That is my understanding. That is not something we can solve by all agreeing on a vocabulary or even like agreeing specific attachment mechanisms. That's really outside, and I think that's unfortunately an expectation that a lot of people who do not follow this closely have towards this general discussion also solving. One is dealing, like I think we are dealing here with a set of problems that's confined to sort of good actors that are willing to follow on signals. There is an entire different set of problems that are caused by bad actors who don't give a.
And I do think that eventually, when we get there, we should recharter and add something about this in the charter, at least to authentication of the automatic clients. I think this was also discussed on the mailing list, and we had a side meeting about it in Bangkok, because it is going to be increasingly important to authenticate the agents or the HTTP clients that are coming to your servers.
I agree, but like I think this is a necessary first step to like how well behaved entities should behave. Like if you have clarity about that, you can start thinking about what to do about non-well behaved.
It would do us well to remember that this working group is not about everything to do with bots. And we have a fairly focused task in front of us. That work might happen here in a recharter, it might happen in a different working group. But yeah, there are many pieces to this.
The queue is closed,
Since I've already talked, let me give you a queue, open the queue, drop my comment, and you can add it.
Oh, okay, like if you can, do you have a few more minutes?
No, it's fine. Yeah.
Okay, so Miria and then Hiro-san at the end of the queue. Martin, did you want to comment?
No, just I had trouble hearing Ted, that's all.
Ted, go ahead.
I agree with the point Gary was making earlier, but I think we want to be a little bit careful in talking about the importance of having a set of clear signals. Because I think what we're trying to do is to say, if we have a set of clear signals, we can say somebody who is not paying attention to the set of clear signals is now subject to a different regime. And maybe that's a different regulatory regime. If some regulator comes along and says, somebody has defined clear signals, obey them. Maybe it's a set of internal processes that say, if you're not obeying these clear signals, I'm going to turn you over to my AI slop generator, which is going to pretend to be an 85-year-old grandmother from Kent, and to talk to you for all of time immemorial about what our Jane has been saying to our city. And all of those things are outside of this first task, which is getting a clear set of signals. But I think we have to kind of be a little bit careful when we are saying that to think about the point that was made even earlier about we don't want to close off the future. So we have to be careful to say that this is a set of clear signals which will be extended in the future in the following months, or in maybe potentially extended in future months, which is why, although you were talking to me about the importance of not getting into a content negotiation structure and having been burned on that many times, I agree with you. I do think we have to have an ability to reference versions. And functionally what you're doing with that kind of E-type-like things is to say, I've seen this version. And I believe if we have that, we can move from one set of signals to expanded set of signals much more naturally as we grow the protocol in the future. So I really believe we need to include that early so that we don't shut off the future in these more extensive signals we will definitely need.
So I agree with you, and I think that's quite well put. What I think we as chairs would like to see is these side conversations, these speculative. There are a lot of different areas, and there's a lot of pressure for we want to go in this direction eventually. And I think we do agree that we need to do the basics first. So I think we need to be able to have those side conversations without them blocking or distracting from the main deliverables. And I think we need to talk about how to facilitate that best, whether it's with separate mailing lists or allowing it on the main mailing list or whatever. So yeah, let's figure out how to do that well.
Yeah, and like just to follow up on like a quick one, right, is that when we talk about versioning, right, like anytime anything changes in this robot.txt, like the RFP, right, like you need to kind of refresh all the nonsense, right, because it's not obvious like when somebody gives you a nonce, like what version of the whole file it was in. So it cannot just be the nonce of the things that changed. So that's what I was initially thinking, right? The simple one would be like if you change something, change the nonce, but the other ones. But it may not be enough because there might be other purposes or usages that could be like different from what was there before. So you could still have a stale nonce without detection if you just update the change nonce. So I think it's a bit more involved than that. I'd like to kind of follow.
It is, but we're going into protocol design now, and we're not sure what the requirements are. So
exactly. Matt.
It was just to say we can't legislate for China, right? We can't legislate for DeepSeek does or anyone else does. But I think if we want to build a market for AI models that are built on content that's permissioned, we need some way of tracking back how that content's been accessed. So the UK government shouldn't be buying DeepSeek and rolling that out across the kind of public estate, but equally I don't think it should be buying AI models from Western companies that haven't obeyed the kind of directions of the publishers who create that content. So this isn't a solution to the problem of kind of exponential rise in kind of bot traffic, but it is saying to have like fair trade or like good provenance AI models. This is what this is about, I think, and that's my piece.
And again, that I think at the workshop and beyond that there was a lot of interest expressed in that, but our initial charter is explicitly not about audit. So I think that's one of those discussions we can have on the side and prime it up for the next phase to make sure that we don't preclude it with the first phase.
I think it would be helpful to have a second example besides robots.txt, because a lot of what we're talking about that goes out of scope is connected to the example of robots.txt. And so having a second example so that when we talk about our ideas, do they fit at least these two separate scenarios, I think would be very productive.
When we get to attachment, I think we've been talking about HTTP headers, we've been talking about embedding in content, and so hopefully that will give us some amount. And then there's the question of like in APIs or for social media sites or whatever, so hopefully we'll get a good page there.
Brian, thanks for patiently waiting.
I actually wanted to reach forward a little bit to the attachment question and drag it back maybe to the vocabulary question, which is, and this was inspired by Timid mentioned, like rechecking robots.txt. And so in my experience, like a pretty common pattern is like might not be a dominant one, but a pretty common thing is that people scrape a lot of content and then redistribute it, and they don't necessarily know which other party is going to be using the content or for what reason. And that's obviously a challenge with these kind of like location attachments, and in some cases, maybe that content could be passed along with the content. So I don't want to drag the conversation too much in that direction, but mostly to note that some of these questions of, like you might not be able to go back to a robust TXT if you're using an HB header to do the collection in the first place. Going back and rechecking usage rights would be basically recrawling, which would be pretty laborious. Checking a robust .txt might be quick and something that you could be expected to do repeatedly over time to update policy, but something like an HTTP header could be quite expensive to refetch. And so you get this kind of like temporal thing. So I think there's a little bit of comment, or I think I vaguely remember seeing some discussion of like timestamps or time limits as part of the attachment. But what I want to I don't have like a specific proposal, but I kind of wanted to raise the idea that like maybe there's a vocabulary for like, you can't redistribute, or you can't reuse this content in a way that you don't have a clear attachment or clear mechanism. That might just be kind of like a meta category of reuse that we might want a vocabulary for.
Thanks, Brian. There's like significant discussion on this, like for the what we call the common crawl use case at the workshop. I think it'll be if you can take a look at it and see if something was not brought up before. Look at it.
Sure. I just, with the chair hat on, that's making me a little nervous because that's talking about distribution, which is kind of a core concern of copyright, and our charter is about model development, deployment, and use. So I'm nervous.
No, that's not saying. Like, look at it and see if something has not been brought up.
Yeah.
Fabrice,
No, very small.
No, I'll put it at the end. Miriam?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that not only if there's no signal, the legal framework applies, but also if there's a signal, the legal framework applies. Like, legal framework can also say that the signal doesn't mean anything. You can still use it for research or whatever. So this is the general principle. I think in the protocol itself, what we need to ensure is that we have both, that we have a way to say, I only allow these uses, or I explicitly not allow these uses. So we need to support both of these things, and I hope that we also can have some discussion in the document about when it's appropriate to apply one or the other mechanism and what the implications are for the ecosystem.
Kiro-san?
Yeah, so regarding the agent type of AI, I think it's a completely different type of the crawlers of bots. So we have discussed the rights of the contents for the common crawl or the crawler time, use time discussion. But for the agent type of the AI, I think we need to think about the performance issue because usually we don't expect any excessive access to the content by humans, but their bots can access to the content with the very aggressive crawling. So I think it's completely different problem than their copyright, but we may need to think about this kind of server performance or their access control.
I wanted to put a finer point on something that Paul said, which is that to me it feels pretty clear that the point of defining these terms and then embedding them in different ways is to support good faith actors on all sides, including on the crawler side and on the content creator and hosting side. Like, that's what this set of tools can facilitate, is good faith actors landing in a better place than where they are today with an existing toolkit which is clearly inadequate to the present context. And then we also have to recognize that set of definitions and signals will then be used like in legal systems in different jurisdictions in all kinds of ways. And people will try to say, oh, well, this was here, so it must mean this. And they will go to court and they will litigate that. And it might be that those interpretations seem graspable in certain places, like in the EU, like you can foretell how people will claim the signals are used, but there's a wider world where we can't exactly foretell that right now. But we should focus on how do we build a set of tools for good faith actors and just recognize that the things are going to be litigated over, but not have that drive or be bound by, or have that be bound what we decide to do.
Well said.
Fabrice, I will prefer that we focus day one on really kind of a vocabulary, because I see people that are really reaching out to robots and other means. And I think there is a clear need to really have a vocabulary for the whole industry, because it will really help being Google others to communicate broadly about this vocabulary, to educate user regulators about what is it, how we use it. And I think today everybody is doing very little different things. And so there is a lack of understanding overall of what people are doing and how the data is used. And again, just focusing these days on defining the vocabulary will, I think, really help. And after that, it's all about implementation detail, who will use this vocabulary, who will stamp the data we use. I think it will be clear in that.
Oh, sorry.
Big up, Glenn.
Hi, I'm Wendy. So I sort of agree with what Alyssa said, that focusing on the good actors on all parties is really the easiest path forward. I will raise, however, that one of the sticking points for, and this is where I'm speaking as a Hollywood studio entity, one of the sticking points we've had to deal with in the last 20 years of the internet, and for those who don't know me, I'm a big internet fan. So this is not a studio guys hate internet fan. We love internet. I love internet. Long-time IETF participant. Is that we have a situation where we have good actor crawlers today. We have good actor content creators. We have bad actor website publishers who have decided to ignore the different parties. And ultimately, we're worried that we find a mechanism that allows us to, when working with only good actors, say, here's the right stuff to do. But we also don't want to get dragged into a situation where somebody says, look, you're a good actor, the crawler was a good actor. The crawler, went to a bad actor publisher and got misled because that bad actor publisher said he represented you and could do stuff. And we don't want to ever get in a situation where somebody says, well, you comply with all the rules, but there's still nothing you can do to deal with the bad actor publisher. And so as I raise issues the next couple days and over the time of this list, that's one of my primary use cases that I'm really afraid of. I like focusing on the good actors only. I think that's a good path forward. But I've always got what do I do with bad actor publishers that get into the system pretending to be good actors? And how do we not enforce against that, because that's not possible here, but that later on I don't get right into a courtroom or a legal framework that says, gee, that's too bad. You did all the right things, but you still lose. I don't want that to be an outcome.
So I'll respond to that very.
Can I just two-finger?
Go ahead, Alyssa.
Well, it's possible you misunderstood me, because I think there's also on the, let's just take site owners as the use case. There's site owners who are blocking things, who, if they had a better set of tools, they would be more granular about what they're allowing or disallowing. And they are also good actors, but they don't have the set of tools that they need today to function properly in the current system. So I also have those people in my mind when I say we need to build tools for good faith actors.
I support that as well, Melissa. So yeah.
So yeah, it's not just what we want to do, it's what we're able to do with the tools we have at hand. We only have technical means. I think this goes back to that document we were talking about that explains the shape of this system to policymakers, that what it can and cannot do, to clarify that. And then, we can talk about audit mechanisms down the road maybe or whatever, but that's really what it comes to, I think.
Yeah. So I don't know who it was that said this, but we're talking about good actors and bad actors. And one of the things that I think is the worst feature of robots.txt is its ability to target specific actors. And I think all the search people are like, no, that's great. That's a cool feature. Brave's caller respects the rules of Googlebot, which says to me that you cannot distinguish between Google and Brave when they're crawling, right? This is one of the sort of side effects of having this sort of thing. I'm vehemently opposed to this idea of using the identity of the thing that's crawling in our vocabulary as a primary mechanism, even though I recognize that maybe we have to with robots.txt. Because I think it creates the situation where the tools that you have to distinguish between good actors and bad actors come down to this, and then that tool is then used to hide bad behavior behind it. So there are a number of people who are concerned about Brave's practices, but not Google's practices, right? And they can no longer distinguish between the two of them. That's concerning to me. And I think just from a purely market equity status, being able to allow new entrants into a market, you don't want to create a system where certain actors get entrenched by virtue of them being recognized by website operators and others don't. And I want to just have that on the record as like something that I would oppose pretty strongly if we start going down that path too much more.
Gary, make a quick comment. Like we have
so I'm going to make a suggestion, just popping up a level. It's 11:20. Lunch is coming at noon-ish. I do think this open discussion is doing us some good, because there's a lot of mismatches in expectations, and talking through it is helping, even if it is somewhat unfocused.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of happy to continue this until lunchtime, and then perhaps we can have a bit more unstructured discussion during lunch. But after we come back from lunch, let's focus on specific proposals and see if we can make some progress. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay.
Gary, make a quick comment and we'll move to Lars.
So I think that goes back to the good faith actor on the internet, because we also have an example where, because we rotate our IP ranges where we crawl from, we have one particular company that's in the news quite a bit, and it's not being, that somehow got one of the crawling ranges that we got rid of, that was repurposed to GCP.
Oh, nice.
Oh, wow.
And they just were crawling for almost a week as Googlebot.
Right.
And it's one of those companies that is in the news, and we know about it because it's like our SREs were. But it can happen. And then it's not very different from like using someone else's user agent token.
Yeah, I think that gets into the bot authentication question a lot more.
Yeah.
And I think that bot authentication being separate from what it is that we're trying to do is an important characteristic of the structure of this work. And not doing bot authentication here is the right answer for all of those reasons. And that's partly why I said I think that a robots.txt user agent targeting is a misfeature. You might disagree, because I think it's a crude approximation of the bot authentication thing that you really want to do, and it's adversely affecting folks who can't participate as a result.
I think Fox, please.
Yeah, so I find it very easy. I'm really glad that I was brought up the good actor discussion, because we keep thinking about who are these violators of the signals, and we want to have ways to create some kind of structure of control to give the site owners. But I also have so this is a venting session, don't mind this. I also have a problem with having this kind of binary good actor, bad actor that we can see in discussions, because how do you actually define a bad actor? If you are not following the signals that the site owner is giving you, might be for very good reasons. You might be, the site owner might be running a government portal and they don't want you to have access to their information, and you are doing some AI product that provides information on the government. So I think that we need to be a little bit more contextual, and I don't think we can, while I think that we should think about use cases that what the good actors that you're doing, like non-commercial purposes, and also things that like actors that we don't generally talk about. We should think about them, but I don't really understand this. I don't really think it's a beneficial approach to have this binary good actor, bad actor.
I think my interpretation, at least when Alyssa was talking about it, and please Alyssa, correct me if I'm wrong, was that good actor is kind of denoting people who are adhering to the protocol, who are
Yes.
using it in the way that's intended. If people don't pay attention to the protocol, then we can't control their behavior. And indeed, we're not chartered to do enforcement mechanisms.
Kerry, if you want a quick reply? Yeah, I have Timid, Fabrice, Leonard, and Cullen.
So I wanted to have a proposal. It's just I was stopped in my tracks for a crawler code of conduct, which would have something like I obey these rules, or yeah, I obey like robots.txt or something like that, and then like have crawlers agree to those code of conduct. Google or Bing probably cannot publish these things because like competition and whatever, but like if someone wants to pick it up, then I'm happy to share a draft then.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kerry.
So first, I wanted to plus one the idea that specific identities like user agents, I think that's would be a bad idea for this vocabulary. Two, I think that trying to anticipate and protect against misuse of the vocabulary, I think is impossible. And I would argue in the example you gave that there's other mechanisms to address, if a website owner is claiming, everyone can scrape this pirated material, that there's other mechanisms to address that, and that it's out of scope for the vocabulary. And that also ties to, I think it might be helpful for us to talk about content holder. People keep bringing up copyright and copyright holder, and I don't see how copyright necessarily has anything to do with the vocabulary that we're defining. That we're really just talking about content holders. Whoever can put the signal on, they can put the signal on. And whether a court decides that that has any traction or not is out of scope for us.
Thanks. Glenn, quick response. Go
Quick
for it.
response. There's this other use case we see a lot. So I'm an IETF trustee. So
Yep.
one of the things we try to do is make the IETF standards available to everybody. We get a lot of people who would use IETF standards who come to us and say, you haven't given us a clear signal if we can use it or not. So therefore, our lawyers are going to disavow or block our make use of your material. And so avoiding that, so it's not always about dealing with piracy. It's also sometimes about positively enabling it, saying, I do get this right. I do have the opportunity to grant this right. And I want you to be complete to what you use it. So it's always not negative, sometimes it's positive.
Fabrice?
To jump a little bit to day two, but I do believe that there is a real problem today because you cannot apply in robust text files or format the preferences at star level. If we were able to specify the preferences at star level, then most sites, as Matt sites, will blanket default none, no AA preferences, and only allow for specific user agent. I think it will solve some of the problems we are observing today.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump back to the identification question. So I would argue, I think it's a very important problem, identification, I would say, of client, because it's not, we don't know that it's a bot, we don't know that it's an agent, as was brought up earlier, or something else. I think that's extremely important, but I do believe it's out of scope for this particular group. So I would love to see the IETF take that work on, but probably not in this scope.
Just have another point. This is nobody was blocking DeepSeek a few months ago because nobody heard about DeepSeek. And so this is again, when you say bad actors and good actors, this is really about what you want to express as preferences that need to apply to everybody. And we need to solve that. We need to have a standard vocabulary, and then we need to find a way to be able to express the default is that, but this is opt-in, opt-out, you decide. But yes, you need to express that everybody, all actors, this will be my blanket rule for all actors.
Unless otherwise identified.
Yeah, I think that this is moving into a bit more productive space now, sort of within the charter's context, and it's good to hear kind of. I really want to echo the suggestion that you made there too. I think there's sort of a lens that we can look at this through, which I assume we'll look at it through this afternoon, which are some of the draft suggestions, which I think, at least in Paul's version, has been largely sort of framed within sort of the categorical space, and I think that where the baton can be passed to this group is sort of getting down and picking up some of that, presuming that the premise is not rejected, sort of translating that into some of the syntactical space. So anyway, I just kind of want to say that some of the comments on, just getting into the nitty gritty about sort of where robots.txt is lacking, I think is, like, broadly speaking, the right direction that we want to be going. And I guess just to sort of encourage that, I'd be curious, and just would pose this as a question for the group, like, both for the publishers and for people on the sort of the crawling side of things, like, what is lacking in terms of the ability to express your preferences? And I think, Alyssa, your point about the good actors, if you can tell the good actors, what would you want to tell them? And we can sort of think about that syntactically within the frameworks and the tools that we have in the categories that have been expressed through sort of Paul's draft. Would be sort of my high level framing.
Well, I want to come back to something that Tim and Robert said. And I think it illustrates a little bit of a fallacy that we need to not. There's often, like, it's both. It's not either or. Like you said, like, there's cases where copyright doesn't play a role. There are contexts where copyright plays a role. Like in the EU context, most of what we're doing is going to be derived from copyright. There's other contexts where it isn't the case, where judges may need to discuss. And so I think in most of these things, same with the opt-out, opt-in thing, the answer is probably, like, there's multiple ways that, like, we need to be able to deal with multiple arrangements that this needs to function in. I can obviously, like, only limiting it to copyright makes it unworkable in a number of contexts. It's right, often, like, the entities controlling these things are not the rights holders or not the original creators and people who are able to express the preference signals. But there's also contexts where they will be rights holders and where it's derived, like, in a sort of like chain of licenses from a copyright grant. So the answer is both, not either or.
So as we start this this decision tree of copyright, not copyright, there's some use cases that I want to highlight that are weird when you do this stuff that we often ignore because they're boring. One of them is there's situations where you are publishing content, but it doesn't have a copyright associated with it. It literally does not, it's not covered by copyright. And you want state policy. So I think having in our grammar the ability to state policies for I'm publishing this, and it does not have a copyright associated with it, because there are some things that are not covered by copyright, is good. And that's a publisher action. I think we've got that included. You've mentioned it. But there's also the case where I am a copyright holder, and I would like to express, yes, I would like you to go off and use this. I'm making this available freely for your use in these ways. Please do it. And I'm giving you my permission. And this isn't just a protection for the copyright holder. This is, and I made this comment earlier, this is an enablement for the copyright user. So it's the crawling agent, so it's the people consuming the crawled material that you're giving the permission, but they then can also assert, and it's not a contract, but they can say, look, this guy's the guy, he gave me permission, I'm gonna go do it. Everything's all good, I can move on here. And capturing both those cases where things aren't protected, but you're given permission, and things are protected, but I'm also given permission, are really useful. And so if we come up with a scheme that does that, we're in the right direction, I think.
But again, Glenn, although copyright has implications for our work, we are not chartered to express copyright preferences.
And let me be clear, I'm not trying to say we get into the weeds of expressing copyright, but when I do hear expressions like, the only thing we can express here is the publisher can make a statement, but nobody else. It would be nice in the grammar have a mechanism by which you can say, I'm website publisher, I'm the website publisher. For the material I'm about to put in this AI preferences.txt, if you want to deal with copyright stuff, either here's the policies that the copyright holder is expressed, or here's the contact information for that person to go talk to. Would be very helpful as an outcome. So I'm not trying to express the copyright, but I'm trying to make a connection between here's the material that's been published, here's where you can go for that if you want to.
But that does sound like a more general mechanism that is outside the scope of our charter.
If possible, it's outside our scope of our charter. I will accept that. You champion things very necessary.
Understand? Your connection is a bit flaky, but hopefully you can speak.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I lost my Wi-Fi for a second.
Yeah,
you're good.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to respond to what Paul said. My sense is that one of the reasons that all the focus in the EU is on copyright is because, well, one of the reasons is because there's already this broad blanket exception for research. And so it's like if in the background framework, you've already dealt with like one very important case of non-commercial scientific use of all of this material, much of which is copyrighted, then like, of course, you can go on to focus on the nitty-gritty details of the commercial uses, but that's not the case in the whole world. So I think I agree with those who have continued to reiterate this, that like we need to kind of focus on content broadly and not only on copyrighted content, because it's making sure that those non-commercial research scientific uses are accounted for in this framework is important worldwide, regardless of whether there's already like a legal mechanism or protection for them.
Just to respond to Glenn, I think one of the things we talked about this on the list a bit is that the attachment, when we get to attachments, that the level of attachment will become relevant. You talk about it from the perspective of the website publisher, and certainly that's going to be relevant. But if we have, and we will have, content-based, asset-based, unit-based, whatever term you want to use, mechanisms as well, then where it is that content is distributed becomes irrelevant if that content has those preferences bound directly into it in one way or another. And so and how those then relate to the distribution point. And again, we talked about this, and we will have to figure this out, and how those things will weigh against each other and play out in the system. I think the other thing worth noting, and this came up, Ori made a mention of this on the mailing list last night, which I think was great, which is another reminder that even within the context of the web and distribution, HTTP is not the only mechanism. And there are other protocols, and IMAP was the one he mentioned, for example, which I think was a great call out. So there are definitely going to have to be other things we think about, again, in these distribution or publishing systems, and how these preferences become relevant within our world.
Can I ask a quick question for Kevin? When you say your first part of your statement, are you talking about expressing territorial information in the policies?
No. I'm saying that, but if you've got, I'll use an example for you. If I have a movie, in a video, embedded inside of that video is a preference signal. Okay, then it doesn't matter whether you are distributing it or Amazon or YouTube or whoever else. If that video has an embedded signal, then that is its AI preference signal, regardless, I would put it forth, regardless of where or how it is distributed.
Interesting. That may, I would suspect, if you do that with intersection of territory and that expression, that I may not fully agree with that, something we should allow or enable. But that's a good debate to have.
Absolutely. I think we're going to need to have that conversation.
Just replying to Leonard, I was actually chatting about that IMAP thing with our Jimmy and Asari, and they would be very happy to see something in the email protocols like IMAP and SMTP and whatever that carries AI preferences. And I was just asking them, like, what would happen if we just like randomly inject like an AI preference line in the conversation, let's say after the auth line that comes back from the server, and they were like, it would probably work, like it probably wouldn't break anything, and then the client can decide what to do with the content based on the preferences that you send back from the server. So yeah.
That opens up a whole interesting discussion, especially with Ray. The protocol itself, you archive that email. I think it's great.
Yeah, so I'm going to disagree with Leonard, I think, on the, it doesn't matter how the distributor expresses their opinions. Because I think for a lot of people who are acting in that distributor role, they may not be able to know for certain what all of the spread of content that they're distributing has said. And so they may have an expression that they want to say, yes, I think it's okay to do these sorts of things. No, it's okay to, you can't do these other things.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't necessarily override the preferences of the person who's produced the content. In fact, I think it's probably a combination of the two of them. The distributor has something to say about the users, because if you imagine a website like YouTube, for instance, the videos that they're putting up there are put up there on certain terms, and there's certain expectations that they have with the people who are uploading the videos. And those people may be uploading those videos under the understanding that YouTube will propagate certain preferences on their behalf, and it may be that they want to have individual distribution of these attached to the videos that don't necessarily, that may be in conflict with what YouTube says. And so maybe that's a situation where both of those preferences are relevant.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? And maybe they're distributing the content by other mediums whereby you get them for AI training, for instance. That's the sort of discussion, I think. I don't know if we have that set up for tomorrow, but that's the sort of thing that I think we should probably talk about with more concrete things in mind.
Sounds good. Just before where you go, I have one, we do have something in the charter for the combination of stuff, at least for the.
We have to.
So you need to deliver something for that.
We have to, yeah.
So my name is Timid Robot. My experience with configuration is I've encountered whatever is first defined wins, whenever there's a conflict, whatever is last defined wins, and whatever is most specific wins. And and so first, my question is, are there kind of other ways of doing
There's
that?
another option, which is the least permissive wins.
Least permissive.
So combining what you just said with what you just said, if I have a person that creates a video and they're sitting in the EU and they express a preferences set which that gets attached to that video and carried along, and I've got a second person working with the same video, and let's assume that these are all good actors, nobody's a bad actor. Mm-hmm. The good actor is sitting in the United States and says, oh, well, within my world and my stuff, I'm same video, I'm encoding it and I'm attaching my preferences to it. If we don't attach a notion of territory to those preference expressions of who it is where I'm seeing when I set them. How do I later resolve which one do I listen to? Because if I'm in the EU, I may, it's very confusing. I don't know how to solve it.
I think
Oh, he has an answer, right?
Oh, I think it goes, I think the consumer has a responsibility to decide who they trust. Right, I don't think that in our vocabulary, it's certainly not in the first phase or the initial, in this charter that we need to solve that problem, right? Like Google can decide that they trust, piracy.com or,
I'm assuming good actors first. Let's assume just good actors and we want to do the right thing.
Right.
So build a mechanism for how, if I want to do the right thing and I'm a good guy and all the people I dealt with are good actors as well, how do I make the choice and resolve the discrepancy? And I saw two hands go up there saying I might have an answer. So.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one. You've got someone who produces an original video in the EU, and they express some preferences about how that might be used under some expectation about how it's going to be distributed by them, right?
From EU
so that's really, the distribution mechanisms then become key in their understanding of how that will ultimately be consumed. And if they just give it to the person in the US, then they have to have some sort of understanding of the person in the US that their preferences will be respected.
Well, if I can, I think your model maybe can use another version, which is a third party creates a video. Yeah. And I hand it to an EU person and say, yeah, you want to publish it in the EU, go ahead, here it is, right. and have fun with it. You're an EU person. I take the same video, I find somebody in the US that wants to publish it and say, here you go, here it is, go off and go use it. In each of their contexts, the two actors in the US and the EU are both trying to do the right thing in their sphere. One's a EU-centric site, one's a US-centric site. So they're going to express policies there. And then some other third party comes along, crawls both those sites, finds the same piece of content, finds two different policies. How do they, again, be a good actor?
Why are the policies different?
Because the person, the two actors who express them may not even be aware of each other. They may not know each other. They are acting independently in good faith, but within the context. So for instance, let me give you a very practical example. The EU person could be publishing in Spain to a Spanish language audience that says, I've got this piece of content, here you go. And my users are people from Spain. And when I express policy, I'm really expressing a policy for people who are in the Spain or the EU text context and are using it in the EU mindset, whatever rules you follow. The person in the US might be similarly publishing it, but they might be publishing it to an American Spanish language audience. And they're not really thinking with the EU. They're not even aware of the EU rules. They don't care. They're not EU. Their audience is the US market. And so they're both going to publish through their channels. And this content, they encode it. Because again, a video is often delivered in a raw format to a distributor who then re-encodes it into their distribution and who then attach their policy set to it.
This does sound like a problem that is about the contractual relationship between these parties,
right?
Not
and
about
the
the mechanism
distribution.
of defining this record.
But it's agreements.
It's also like
but
the
it's
general copyright
also
problem that we're not going to solve here. That copyright is territorial.
Yes,
at least
right.
if we're in the copyright context.
There are treaties that solve this.
Yes,
I'm not trying to solve the copyright issue. I'm trying to deal with the conflict.
I think I have a way of re-expressing a problem that may make it easier for people to understand. What Glenn is trying to say is that there is a signal here that we're not going to be able to express just referencing the content. And that is the signal that tells you in which context the content producer or rights holder is expecting the signal to be consumed. So you're saying that there is a preference, but within the space of the interpretation of that preference, there is also a jurisdictional signal, and that you might need to vary the preference signal based on what the jurisdictional context is.
And this goes back to I agree with you, Ted.
And you were saying earlier, I want a territory, and the territory then becomes an explicit signal, so that you can marry two different explicit signals. I have bad news for you, and that is the internet don't work that way. And I have a point to Paul, we're also not going to fix the jurisdictional part of copyright. So I think, especially for the August deliverable, we have to rule this out of scope because it becomes not just a rat hole from which we will never emerge, it becomes a trap, and we will just be stuck in the tar, pulling until we fall in and drown.
I appreciate the comment, but I'm trying not to make this a copyright issue. Because I don't see it as a copyright issue. I see it as
it's a jurisdictional issue, though, right?
Two parties publish preferences around the same piece of content. Each one of them is doing the right thing in their own context, but we lack the context of, we're not capturing the context in which they publish their preferences.
Sure. We can.
Leonard, I think we'll exhaust the queue. We'll come back to it. This is not gonna end. Like,
Can
yeah,
I-
there is a queue. Yeah,
Either I misunderstand you, or it is up to, like, the preference is an instruction to somebody who uses it or who wants to do something with it. So the relevant context for following up on the thing is almost certainly the context within which the entity using either of these works operates. I think that resolves it.
Oh, okay, I accept that, but again, it's a question of how, so I'm the entity using it. I've crawled the global internet, it's global, and I've received two policies that are potentially in conflict.
Can you make that just a little more concrete? It might help. Explain the situation where one of them says no generative AI and the other one says yes generative AI. How would you arrive at that if they're all acting in good faith? I can accept that if someone's not acting in good faith, you would arrive.
Exactly. So which is why I'm trying to scope it is everybody's a good faith actor here.
Right.
And I've received, one says you can use it for training, the other one says you can't.
Is it a diamond?
And I want to know, sort of.
So there's an original piece of content
Yes.
that goes two ways and gets two different signals, contradictory signals.
Yes.
And then they come to the same person. How did that happen?
Well, because
How did the one person receive the two?
So I think we this does feel like a rat hole.
Yes.
Well, no, but it's from a reuse standpoint, reuse
It's
point.
fundamental
One of the
issues
problems,
at the bottom. So if we go back from the jurisdictional issue, back to first principle, so you can have a situation where there's multiple parties involved. Let's say a very simple case, a website and the actual creator of the content or the owner of the file.
Right.
And you do have a situation where they could have different policies, and I think Martin's approach of strictest policy wins is exactly the right one for that.
Right.
I don't know if we can solve the jurisdictional problem, but the formal problem we can solve and should solve.
Right. And that is indeed in our chart. So what I would suggest is maybe, Glenn, could you write a message trying to explain this clearly to the
I'll
list?
try. And also, let me just say that if we did follow the strictest policy wins, that might be a path to resolve this, that resolve it. But I have to choose all the different use cases to see if it does.
All right. So if you could just take it to the list
I'll try.
and
I'll
be
try.
as crisp as you can. Otherwise, I fear we're going to.
And I
sink
don't want
into
to do
a
that.
hole. Yeah.
I'm trying to be constructive.
Thank you so much.
Thanks. Following the queue, I think, okay, it's a long queue.
So please, no one respond to that. Withhold from continuing that discussion.
Yeah, Leonard.
Oh, shall I go?
Huh? Yeah, that is.
Oh, yeah, okay. You know if that was your comment. You know what, if we're gonna put this, I'm happy to just move my comments off and we can put them somewhere else. Yep.
Thank you. Ted, did your response to Glenn was a comment or did you have a response? Yes. Joseph?
My comment was on the rat hole, so I'll hold it for now.
Paul?
Well, we're doing excellent work. Fabrice, did you know what time lunch is coming?
It will be between noon and noon 30, so I will check in 5 minutes.
Thank you.
I would like to stop taking notes at noon.
Okay.
Perhaps this will be resolved on the list, but I do think there is a scope issue about conflicting signals and whether we make a recommendation for resolution of conflicting signals or whether we say we're not going to say anything about that.
Like that was a topic of discussion during the workshop, and we did agree that we had to have something in that space. It may not be a complete solution, but we have to we have to at least address that problem somehow.
I strongly suspect it's going to be an incomplete solution in that, again, and as I think we said in chat, we can never conclusively say you have permission or the legal right to use this. It's not only about copyright, it's also about data protection and other considerations, and you're getting this information from potentially untrusted sources. But we can give some guidelines to resolve conflicts between the known mechanisms for attachment, and get some sort of result from that.
We're setting expectations, I think, would be the best that we could get out of anything like that.
Matt, you have your slightly unconvincing hand up. Did you want to say something?
I was just waving at you.
Okay. Brad.
No, I'm also ex-Red Hole, so no.
Okay. Okay.
Wow.
So thanks a lot. This must not have been a easy note-taking session. I'll give you a hand massage after.
Aw.
I don't know if that's a thing.
If you could review it quickly, there are a couple of things in parentheses where I missed things. So if you could do a quick review and make sure I captured what you said correctly, I spelled your name at least vaguely correctly, and it follows what you said. That would be really useful for those who were not able to be here.
How would you do that?
It's in the Hedge Talk, and I put a link to it in the.
I just
chat.
posted it again as well.
Right. Maybe we should post
If
that
you're not in the
to
chat, I can send it to the mailing list as well. Would that help?
I can get in the chat.
Okay.
So we're almost at the top of the hour. What I'd suggest is we go ahead and break now. It seems like we've come to a natural stopping point.
Yeah.
Continue discussions during the break. Lunch will arrive hopefully fairly soon. And we'll come back here at 1 p.m. Brussels time and move to the specific proposals. Does that sound good?
Good.
Okay. So remote folks will be back in an hour and 5 minutes. I'm going to mute the local microphone. Keep the camera going.
For the people who are remote, the afternoon session will be in a different Meet Echo.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, it will be a different link, so you'll need to rejoin. Yeah, actually, this will end soon. So I think we'll go ahead and leave this Meet Echo, and we'll be in the other one in an hour and 5 minutes.
And sorry, all the links are in the data tracker?
They are in the materials page for each session.
Okay, thank you.
And if you have trouble, ping us using the various mechanisms.
Let's just send another note to them.
Yeah, we'll send it. That's a good idea. We'll send an
Also
info
on the-
list with a data tracker link.
It's also on the meetings page, on the data tracker.
Yeah.
There's no point in making
Okay.
a search for it.
Bye.
Data tracker is
For lunch, some people have